I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. I've always believed that objects hold memories, but I never imagined they could have a will of their own. The first time I noticed something was off, I chalked it up to fatigue. It had been a long day setting up the new Egyptian exhibit at the Hartwick Museum of Antiquities. As I made my final rounds before closing, I could have sworn the obsidian cat statue had moved. Just slightly, mind you. Angled more towards the door than I remembered placing it. "Get it together, Sarah," I muttered, rubbing my eyes. "This is what happens when you skip lunch." I repositioned the statue, making a mental note to double-check all the display cases tomorrow. The last thing I needed was some prankster messing with the exhibits after hours. But when I arrived the next morning, that nagging feeling returned. This time, it wasn't just the cat. The entire layout of the sarcophagus display had shifted. Not dramatically. Casual visitors probably wouldn't notice. But to my curator's eye, it was like walking into your living room and finding all the furniture moved 2 inches to the left. I pulled up the security footage, my finger hovering over the trackpad. Part of me didn't want to look, afraid of what I might, or might not, see. The video showed. Nothing, just empty halls and still displays. At 2:17 a.m., there was a slight flicker in the feed. When the image stabilized, the exhibits had moved. No shadowy figures, no sign of tampering. They had simply rearranged themselves. "Okay, this is weird," I said to no one in particular, my voice echoing in the empty gallery. I rewound the footage, watching it again and again. Each time, the same thing happened. A flicker, then change. I spent the next hour meticulously returning everything to its proper place, snapping photos on my phone for reference. My mind raced with possibilities. A glitch in the camera. Some elaborate hoax, or was I simply losing it? As I locked up that night, I found myself hesitating at the door. "Don't be ridiculous," I scolded myself. "They're just objects. Inanimate." But standing there in the dim emergency lighting, the shadows seemed to stretch and warp. The gilded eyes of masks and statues gleamed, as if watching me. I shivered, hurrying out into the cool night air. Sleep didn't come easy. I tossed and turned, plagued by vivid dreams of ancient rituals and whispering voices in languages long dead. When my alarm finally blared, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. I almost didn't want to go in, terrified of what I might find. But I had responsibilities, a reputation to maintain. I couldn't let some unexplained phenomenon get the better of me. The museum was quiet as I entered, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Everything seemed normal at first glance. Then I rounded the corner to the main gallery and stopped dead in my tracks. The exhibits hadn't just moved this time. They had been completely rearranged. Artifacts from different dynasties, different continents even, were grouped together in bizarre tableaus. The obsidian cat now sat atop a Mayan sacrificial altar. A Roman gladiator's helmet rested inside an open sarcophagus. "What the hell?" I breathed, my heart racing. This was beyond a prank, beyond any reasonable explanation. The sheer weight of some of these pieces made moving them a major ordeal. To do all this in one night, undetected. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking as I pulled up the security app. The footage showed the same thing as before. A flicker at 2:17 a.m. and then this. No, 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 I muttered, pacing the gallery. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was. And deep down, a part of me knew it would happen again. The next few days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and increasingly frantic days. I stopped fixing the displays, letting them remain in their new configurations. Each morning brought a new, unsettling arrangement. Each night, I'd watch the security feed in real time, desperate to catch something, anything, but it was always the same. A flicker, then change. As if reality itself hiccuped. I knew I should tell someone. The board, the police, hell, even those ghost hunting TV shows. But who would believe me? I had video evidence that showed nothing. I'd be labeled a crackpot, or worse, suspected of tampering with priceless artifacts myself. So I kept it to myself, watching helplessly, as my carefully curated exhibits took on a life of their own. But it wasn't just the movement that was getting to me. It was the feeling that the new arrangements meant something, that the objects were trying to tell me something. It was during one of my late-night vigils that I noticed the pattern. Blurry-eyed from staring at camera feeds, I started sketching the layouts in my notebook. As I flipped through the pages, something clicked. Holy shit, I whispered, spreading the drawings out on my desk. Each night's configuration, when viewed as a whole, formed a symbol. Ancient glyphs, alchemical signs, things I vaguely recognized from my studies, but couldn't quite place. I threw myself into research, poring over obscure texts and archaeological journals. The symbol seemed to be counting down, marking the passage of time towards something. But what? As I dug deeper, I found references to an old theory. Dismissed by mainstream archaeology, it suggested that certain artifacts, when brought together, could act as a sort of key, a way to access other places, other times. It sounded insane, the ramblings of fringe scholars and occultists. But after what I'd seen, could I really discount anything? The next week passed in a frenzy of research and mounting dread. I stopped going home altogether, sleeping on the couch in my office when exhaustion finally overtook me. My dreams were filled with visions of vast, impossible cities and whispered invitations in ancient tongues. I knew I should have gotten rid of the artifacts, sent them to other museums, locked them away in deep storage. But something kept me from it. A compulsion I couldn't shake. I had to see this through. Finally, the night I had been dreading arrived. The night when the countdown, if I had interpreted it correctly, would reach 0. I paced the main gallery, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The air felt thick, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand on end. As midnight approached, I found myself arranging the artifacts myself, guided by some instinct I didn't understand. My watch beeped. 12 a.m. Nothing happened. I let out a shaky laugh, equal parts relief and disappointment. "Get a grip, Sarah," I said aloud. "You're letting your imagination run wild over some coincidences and bad security equipment." That's when I noticed the shadows were wrong. They stretched and twisted, defying the laws of physics and the placement of the gallery lighting. As I watched, heart pounding, they began to coalesce, to take shape. The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. The shadows writhed and pulsed, and I could have sworn I heard whispers. Voices speaking in languages that had no business being heard in modern-day America. I should have run. Should have gotten the hell out of there and never looked back. But I was rooted to the spot, equal parts terrified and awestruck. The shadows parted like a curtain, revealing something. A doorway, a portal, A window. I didn't have words to describe it. Through it, I caught glimpses of a place that hurt my eyes to look at. A place where the angles were all wrong, where colors I couldn't name swirled in impossible patterns. And there were figures, shapes that might have been humanoid if humans had too many limbs and eyes in all the wrong places. They beckoned to me, their movements hypnotic and alien. I took a step forward, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't resist. This was it. The discovery of a lifetime. Proof of everything. My foot crossed the threshold. Instantly, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. Cold beyond cold lanced through me. I tried to scream, but there was no air, no sound. Just an infinite void that threatened to tear me apart. With the last of my strength, I hurled myself backwards. I hit the gallery floor hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. The portal pulsed, hungry. Tendrils of shadow reached for me. Panic gave me strength. I scrambled to my feet, toppling displays as I ran. Alarms blared, but I didn't care. I ran until I hit the street, gasping in the cool night air. When the police arrived, they found me babbling incoherently on the sidewalk. The security footage showed nothing but static. The artifacts were in disarray, but the official report blamed it on an attempted burglary, foiled by the alarm system. I tried to tell them the truth, tried to explain what I had seen, but the words sounded insane, even to my own ears. In the harsh light of day, with concerned colleagues and stern-faced detectives staring at me, I started to doubt my own memories. They chalked it up to stress and overwork, suggested I take a leave of absence. I didn't argue, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear those whispers, still see those impossible angles when I close my eyes, and I wonder, what if I had taken one more step? Where would I be now? I've always believed that objects hold memories. Now I know they hold so much more. Secrets, doorways, and hunger. Story 2. The sea has always whispered secrets, but I never thought it would scream them. My first night at Craven's Point Lighthouse was quiet, save for the rhythmic slosh of waves against the rocky shore. I'd taken the job to escape, from the noise of the city, from the ghosts of my past, from everything. Just me, the lighthouse, and 50 miles of unforgiving coastline in either direction. This is exactly what you need, Jack, I muttered to myself, as I climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room. The brass fixtures gleamed in the dying sunlight, polished to perfection by generations of keepers before me. I ran my hand along the cool metal of the railing, feeling the weight of history in every step. As darkness fell, I fired up the beacon. The familiar hum of machinery filled the air as the light began its nightly rotation. One flash every 10 seconds, a steady heartbeat in the vast darkness of the Atlantic. I settled into my routine quickly. Days spent on maintenance and upkeep, nights monitoring the light and scanning the horizon. The solitude was exactly what I'd hoped for. No people, no problems, just me and the endless sea. It was during my 3rd week that I first heard it. A crackle of static from the old radio set in the corner, startling me from a half-doze in my chair. I frowned, reaching for the dial. The thing was ancient, barely functional on a good day. I'd been meaning to replace it, but supply runs were few and far between out here. The static cleared for a moment, replaced by a voice, faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. Mayday, Mayday. This is the IS Hesperos. We've lost power and are adrift. Our position is... The transmission cut out, swallowed by another burst of static. I leaned in, straining to hear, but it was gone. Hello, This is Craven's Point, Lighthouse. Do you copy? I called into the microphone, but got no response. Just more static. I grabbed the logbook, flipping through the pages. No scheduled ships in the area, and certainly none by that name. A prank, maybe? Some bored fisherman getting his kicks. But something about the voice had sounded off. Old-fashioned, almost. Like one of those crackling recordings from the 40s. I shook my head, chalking it up to an overactive imagination fueled by too much solitude. Still, I made a note in the log, just in case. The next few nights passed uneventfully. I almost managed to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. Then it happened again. This time, I was ready. I scrambled for the radio the moment I heard the static, fumbling with the dials to clear up the signal. Running out of time. The fog, it's not natural. Something's out there, watching us. The same voice, tight with panic. In the background, I could hear shouting, the creak of timber under stress. "This is Craven's Point," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. "What's your position?" Over. For a moment, nothing. Then, who is this? "This channel is for emergency broadcasts only. Please identify yourself." I blinked, thrown by the question. "This is Jack Hawkins, lighthouse keeper at Craven's Point. I'm responding to your distress call. Do you need assistance?" Silence. Then a burst of laughter, harsh and humorless. "Craven's Point? That lighthouse has been automated for decades? Who is this really?" The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "What? No, that's impossible. I'm here right now. I've been here for weeks." But the radio had gone silent again. This time, it didn't come back. I spent the rest of the night poring over the lighthouse records, my heart racing. The logbooks went back decades, chronicling the daily lives of keepers long dead. But they stopped abruptly in 1952. After that, nothing but automated system reports and maintenance logs. "This doesn't make any sense," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. I knew I wasn't crazy. I was here, wasn't I? I could feel the worn leather of the chair beneath me, smell the salt air and oil from the machinery. But doubt began to creep in, cold and insidious as the fog rolling in off the water. The next day, I radioed the Coast Guard station on the mainland. The conversation did nothing to settle my nerves. Craven's Point. "Yeah, that's been automated since the 50s, the officer said, his voice tinny through the old speakers. "You sure you're calling from there?" I opened my mouth to argue, then thought better of it. "Must have misspoke," I said instead. "Thanks for the information." I hung up before he could ask any more questions. That night, as I climbed the tower to light the beacon, every shadow seemed to hide a secret. The familiar creaks and groans of the old structure took on a sinister quality. I found myself jumping at every noise, half expecting to see ghostly figures lurking in corners. The sea was restless, choppy waves slapping against the rocks below. As I peered out into the gloom, I could have sworn I saw lights on the horizon. Faint, flickering things that vanished when I blinked. The radio crackled to life again just after midnight. "Please, if anyone can hear this, we're lost. The instruments are going haywire. The fog, it's alive somehow, watching us, hungry." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the microphone. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend this wasn't happening, but I couldn't. Whatever was going on, those people needed help. "This is Craven's Point," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "I hear you. What's your position?" "Craven's Point. But that's impossible. We just passed the ruins of that lighthouse. It's been dark for years." My blood ran cold. What do you mean, ruins? I'm standing here right now. The light is on. There was a long pause. When the voice came back, it was quieter, filled with a dread that made my skin crawl. What year is it there? I swallowed hard. 2024. Why? What year is it for you? The answer, when it came, hit me like a physical blow. 1952. The radio went dead. This time, no amount of fiddling with the dials could bring it back. I stumbled to the window, my legs weak. The lights I'd seen earlier were closer now, a dozen pinpricks of ghostly blue cutting through the fog. As I watched, they began to move, forming a circle that slowly rotated around the lighthouse. Ship lights, but not from any ships that should exist in 2024. The logical part of my brain screamed that this was impossible, but I couldn't deny the evidence of my own eyes. Somehow, impossibly, I was witnessing a tragedy that had happened over 70 years ago, and I was powerless to stop it. The next few days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. I radioed the mainland again, desperate for human contact, for someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. But the Coast Guard officer I spoke to had no record of our previous conversation. According to him, no one had manned Craven's Point in decades. I began to doubt everything. My memories, my senses, my very existence. Was I really here? Or was I somehow trapped in some kind of time loop, reliving the last days of a long-dead lighthouse keeper? The radio transmissions continued, growing more frantic with each passing night. I learned the names of the crew, heard their stories, their hopes and fears. And all the while, those ghostly lights circled, drawing ever closer. I tried to warn them, tried to guide them to safety, but it was like shouting into the wind. They couldn't hear me. Or if they did, they couldn't understand. On the 7th night, it all came to a head. The storm that had been brewing for days finally broke, lashing the lighthouse with wind and rain. The beacon cut through the darkness, a futile attempt to pierce the impenetrable gloom. The radio burst to life one last time. No static now. The voice came through, clear as day, as if the speaker was standing right next to me. It's here. God help us, it's here. The fog. It's not fog at all. It's alive. It's... oh God, no, please. A scream. The sound of tearing metal. Then silence. I raced to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass. The ghostly lights were gone, but in their place, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. A shape in the fog. Vast, unknowable. Tentacles of mist that moved with terrible purpose. And eyes. Dozens of eyes, glowing with an eldritch light that spoke of hunger older than time itself. It turned those eyes on me, and in that moment, I understood. The lighthouse had never been meant to guide ships to safety. It was a lure, a beacon not of hope but of doom. And I was just the latest in a long line of unwitting accomplices. As the thing in the fog reached for the lighthouse, its misty tendrils seeking purchase on the weathered stone, I made a decision. I ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. Not until I reached the lantern room. With shaking hands, I threw the main switch. The beacon sputtered and died, plunging the world into darkness. I don't know if it will be enough, if breaking the cycle will stop whatever has been happening here for who knows how long. But I had to try. Now I sit in the dark, listening to the howl of the wind and the crash of the waves, waiting. The sea has always whispered secrets, but now, I fear, It's my turn to become one. Story 3. They say knowledge is power, but some secrets are better left buried in the dust of history. The first time I noticed something was off, I was elbow deep in a box of moldy city records from the 1920s. The musty smell of old paper filled my nostrils as I carefully lifted out a water-stained folder, its contents threatening to disintegrate at the slightest touch. "What have we here?" I muttered, squinting at the faded typewriter text. It was a police report, unremarkable at first glance. But as I scanned the page, my heart began to race. The details were vague, but unmistakable. A series of disappearances, all centered around the old Blackwood estate. The same estate that was now being demolished to make way for a new shopping complex. I frowned, reaching for my laptop to cross-reference the names. But as I typed, a chill ran down my spine. The database showed no record of these missing persons. It was as if they had never existed. "That can't be right," I said, my voice echoing in the empty archive room. I turned back to the folder, but my elbow knocked it off the table. Papers scattered across the floor, and as I bent to pick them up, I froze. There, in the corner of the room, was a security camera I'd never noticed before. Its red light blinked steadily, watching. I shook my head, chuckling nervously. "Get it together, Eliza," I scolded myself. "You're letting your imagination run wild." But as I gathered the papers, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The next few days passed in a blur of dusty boxes and flickering fluorescent lights. I threw myself into the digitization project, scanning countless documents into the city's new online system. But my mind kept wandering back to that police report. I found myself seeking out more records from that era, piecing together a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. More disappearances, hushed-up accidents, and always, the name Blackwood lurking in the background. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I first saw it. A figure just at the edge of my vision. I whirled around, heart pounding, but the archive room was empty. Just rows of shelves and the quiet hum of my computer. I rubbed my eyes, blaming the hallucination on too much caffeine and too little sleep. But as I turned back to my work, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The file I'd been reading was gone. I searched frantically, tearing through stacks of papers, but it had vanished without a trace. And when I checked the security footage, I saw nothing. Just static, and then the file was gone. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Some crucial piece of the puzzle that would make everything make sense. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, my alarm was blaring. I dragged myself out of bed, my head pounding from too little sleep and too many questions. As I waited for my coffee to brew, I scrolled through my phone, more out of habit than interest. But a news alert caught my eye, making me nearly drop the device. Construction halted at Blackwood Estate site. Human remains discovered. I was out the door before I'd even finished my first cup. My mind racing. This was it. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That there was something to the stories I'd uncovered. The archive was quiet when I arrived, the early morning sun casting long shadows through the high windows. I made a beeline for the section where I'd found the original police report, determined to gather every scrap of information before anyone could stop me. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. Someone was already there. A figure stood with its back to me, leafing through a file. It was tall, unnaturally so, its proportions all wrong, and it was wearing. I squinted, not quite believing my eyes. It was wearing clothes that looked straight out of the 1920s. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. "This area is restricted. Can I help you find something?" The figure turned, and I had to stifle a scream. Where its face should have been was just blur, like a photograph that had been smeared before it could develop. I blinked, and it was gone. The file that had been holding fluttered to the ground. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was the missing police report, the one that had vanished days ago. I ran to my computer, my fingers flying over the keys as I pulled up the security footage. But instead of the empty room I expected to see, the screen showed me, talking to thin air, picking up a file that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered, my voice cracking. That's when I noticed the email notification blinking in the corner of my screen. New message from... I froze. The sender's name was one I'd seen in those old police reports. A name that should have belonged to someone long dead. With a shaking hand, I clicked it open. "Stop digging. For your own safety, and ours. Some secrets should stay buried." I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. This was impossible. I was losing it. I had to be. But deep down, I knew. This was real. And I was in way over my head. The next week was a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I jumped at every shadow, flinched at every unexpected noise. The archive, once my sanctuary, now felt like a trap closing in around me. I tried to focus on my work, to pretend everything was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The security cameras seemed to follow my every move, their red lights blinking like accusing eyes. And the anomalies kept piling up, files rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking, whispered conversations that cut off the moment I entered a room, and always, that sense of a presence just out of sight. I started taking photos of everything, desperate for some concrete evidence. But each time I reviewed them, the images were blurry, distorted, as if something was actively preventing me from documenting what I was seeing. It all came to a head on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was deep in the stacks, cross-referencing some land deeds, when I heard it. Footsteps echoing on the tile floor. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I peered around the shelf, my heart in my throat. And there it was again. That figure with its blurred face and old-fashioned clothes. Only this time, it wasn't alone. A dozen figures moved through the archive, their edges fuzzy and indistinct. They moved with purpose, pulling out files, leafing through documents, erasing history. I must have made a noise, because suddenly they all turned to look at me. A dozen non-faces, staring right through me. I ran, sprinted for the exit, my lungs burning, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't stop until I was out on the street, the cold rain soaking through my clothes. When I finally caught my breath, I looked back at the archive building. It stood there, solid and unremarkable. No sign of the impossible scene I'd just witnessed. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that, I couldn't bring myself to go back. Not yet. Not until I figured out what the hell was going on. I spent hours poring over the photos and notes I'd managed to smuggle out. Most of it was useless, corrupted or blurred beyond recognition. But there were fragments, pieces of a puzzle that painted a terrifying picture. The Blackwood family hadn't just been wealthy industrialists. They'd been something else. Something that had its tendrils deep in the city's history, manipulating events from the shadows. And whatever they weren't human. Not entirely. As I connected the dots, a chill settled over me. The disappearances, the covered-up accidents, they weren't random. They were sacrifices. Part of some grand, terrible design that had been unfolding for nearly a century. And now, with the estate being demolished, something had been unleashed. Something that wanted to erase all evidence of its existence. I knew I should run. Pack a bag and get as far away from this cursed city as I could. But I couldn't. Not with what I knew. Someone had to stop this, to bring the truth to light. Even if it costs me everything. So here I sit, surrounded by scattered papers and humming electronics. The rain patters against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbles. I'm uploading everything I've found to secure servers, spreading the information as far and wide as I can. Because I know they're coming for me. I can feel it. The air is thick with anticipation, like the moment before lightning strikes. I don't know if anyone will believe me, if this record will be dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman, but I have to try. They say knowledge is power, but some secrets have a power all their own, and I fear I've only scratched the surface of what's really going on in this city. If you're reading this, be careful. Watch the shadows. Question everything. And whatever you do, don't trust the arc you story for. The first time I saw him, I thought nothing of it. Just another late-night customer, bleary-eyed and caffeine-starved. But some people, they leave an impression. And some impressions, they never fade. The fluorescent lights of the Quick Mart buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over the aisles of chips and candy. I'd been on the night shift for about a month, and the novelty had long since worn off. Now it was just me, the hum of the coolers, and the occasional drunk stumbling in for smokes or a microwave burrito. The bell over the door chimed at exactly 3 a.m. I looked up from my dog-eared paperback, expecting to see the usual crowd. Maybe Tom, the insomniac trucker, or Sarah from the hospital on her break. But this guy, he was different. He moved with a strange, fluid grace, like he wasn't quite touching the ground. Dressed all in black, with a hat pulled low over his eyes. I couldn't make out his face, but something about him sent a shiver down my spine. "Evening," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let me know if you need any help." He didn't respond, just drifted through the aisles, picking up items with precise, deliberate movements. A carton of milk, a loaf of bread, a pack of batteries. Always the same things, I'd realize later. When he came to the counter, I got my first good look at him, and I wished to God I hadn't. His skin was pale, almost translucent. I could see the blue veins pulsing beneath, like rivers on a map. But his eyes, they were black, not dark brown, not hidden in shadow. Black as pitch, without iris or pupil. Just endless, empty voids. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Will that be all?" I managed to croak out. He nodded, not speaking. Paid in cash, exact change. And then he was gone, the bell chiming in his wake. I stood there for a long moment, heart pounding. Then I shook my head, laughing nervously. "Get it together, Mike," I muttered. "This night shift is messing with your head." But deep down I knew something wasn't right. The next night, same thing. 3 a.m. on the dot, that chime. The same man, the same purchases. Not a word spoken. And the night after that, and the night after that, I started dreading that chime. My hands would shake as I rang up his items, avoiding those bottomless eyes. I thought about quitting, finding a nice day job, stocking shelves or flipping burgers. Anything to escape this nightly visitation. But curiosity gnawed at me. Who was he? What was he doing with all this stuff? And why? Why did he never speak? It was about 2 weeks in when I finally worked up the courage to follow him. I waited until he left, then flipped the sign to closed and bolted out the door. My heart raced as I spotted his dark figure moving down the empty street. He walked 4 blocks, never looking back. The streets got narrower, the buildings older and more decrepit. Finally, he turned down an alley I'd never noticed before. I hesitated at the entrance, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I'd come this far. I had to know. The alley seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in around me. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of decay. And then, suddenly, it opened up into a small courtyard. What I saw there, I still have trouble believing it. Dozens of people, all identical to my mysterious customer, moving in perfect synchronization, building. Something, I couldn't make sense of it. Metal and flesh and pulsing light, all twisted together into a shape that hurt my eyes to look at. And in the center, a swirling vortex of darkness, a hole in the world. I must have made a sound, because suddenly they all turned. 100 pairs of those black, empty eyes fixed on me. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Didn't stop until I was back in the fluorescent safety of the Quick Mart, gasping for breath. I called in sick the next day, spent hours poring over city maps, trying to find that alley. But it was like it had never existed. When I finally dragged myself back to work, I was a wreck. Jumpy, paranoid. Every shadow seemed to hide one of those pale figures. Every sound was that damned door chime. 3 a.m. rolled around. I held my breath, waiting. Nothing. The relief was palpable. Maybe it was over. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, at 3:01, the chime. He walked in, same as always. But this time, he wasn't alone. 4 of them, moving in perfect unison. They spread out through the store, grabbing items off the shelves. More than usual. Much more. As they approached the counter, I felt the blood drain from my face. They knew. They had to know I'd seen them. 1. "I don't want any trouble," I stammered. The leader, my regular customer, tilted his head. And then, for the first time, he spoke. His voice was like rustling leaves and grinding stone. "No trouble," he said, the words coming out stilted, as if he was unused to forming them. "We are grateful for your service." I blinked, confused. "My service?" He nodded, those black eyes boring into me. "You have been most helpful. The portal requires much energy. Your establishment has provided well." My mind reeled. Portal, energy. What the hell was he talking about? As if reading my thoughts, he continued. "Your world has much we need, but direct interaction is difficult. You have been our conduit, our anchor." A cold dread settled in my stomach. What are you?" A sound came from him then. It took me a moment to realize it was laughter. "We are the in-between, neither here nor there. We exist in the spaces you cannot see." He leaned in close, and I caught a whiff of something ancient and alien. "And soon, very soon, we will be everywhere." I wanted to run, to scream, but I was rooted to the spot, transfixed by those endless black eyes. "The time is near," he said. "The alignment approaches. We require one final component." My voice was barely a whisper. "What component?" His lipless mouth twisted into what might have been a smile. "You." Everything happened so fast after that. Pale hands grabbing me, dragging me over the counter. The world spinning, blurring, and then darkness. Complete, absolute darkness. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, I was in that courtyard again. But now, the strange construction was complete. A towering monstrosity of metal and flesh and pulsing light. And the portal, it was bigger. Much bigger. They had me strapped to some kind of altar, my clothes replaced with robes covered in symbols I didn't recognize. The pale figures moved around me, chanting in a language that hurt my ears. As the chanting reached a crescendo, I felt something. A tugging, not at my body, but at something deeper. My very essence. I screamed, but no sound came out. The world was fading, reality unraveling around me. And then, just as I thought it was all over, a miracle happened. The first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. Sunlight streamed into the courtyard. The pale figures shrieked, their bodies smoking where the light touched them. They scattered, diving for the shadows. In the confusion, I managed to break free. I ran, stumbling and disoriented, back through the twisting alley. Somehow, I found my way to the street. I didn't stop running until I reached the police station, babbled my story to the bewildered officers. They didn't believe me, of course, but they did send a patrol to check out the Quick Mart. They found it ransacked, and me. Officially, I'd been missing for 3 days. I quit that job, needless to say, moved to a new city, started over, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Sometimes, late at night, I hear that chime, see those black eyes in the shadows, and I wonder, what would have happened if the sun hadn't risen when it did? What's out there, in the spaces between? And how long before they find another conduit, another anchor? So if you're working the night shift, and a pale man in black comes in at 3 a.m., don't serve him. Don't even look at him. Just run. Run, and don't look back. Because some customers, they leave an impression. And some impressions, they never fade. Story 5. I never thought a simple notification could turn my life into a waking nightmare. But here I am, wide awake at 2:16 a.m., staring at my phone and dreading the alert I know is coming. It all started about a month ago. I'd just installed one of those fancy smart doorbells. You know, the kind with a camera that sends alerts to your phone when someone's at the door. As a single woman living alone, it seemed like a good safety measure. Oh, the irony. The first week was great. I got alerts when packages were delivered. Saw when the neighbor's cat decided my welcome mat was the perfect napping spot. That sort of thing. Normal, even boring stuff. Then came that first to 17 a.m. notification. I was dead asleep when my phone buzzed, the screen lighting up the darkened bedroom. Groggy and confused, I fumbled for it, squinting at the glare. Motion detected at front door, the alert read. My heart rate picked up a bit as I tapped to view the live feed. The porch light cast a dim glow, but there was nothing there. Just an empty stoop and the gentle sway of the potted fern in the night breeze. Probably just a stray cat, I muttered, dropping the phone back on the nightstand. I rolled over and went back to sleep, dismissing it as a random glitch. But the next night, same thing. 2:17 a.m. on the dot, motion detected. Again, nothing on camera. By the third night, I was starting to get freaked out. This time, I got out of bed and crept to the front door, heart pounding. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, ear pressed against the wood, listening for any sound. Nothing but the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the hallway clock. Finally, I worked up the courage to open the door. The porch light flickered on, motion activated, but the stoop was empty. No sign anyone or anything had been there. I called the company the next day, thinking there must be some kind of malfunction. The tech support guy was sympathetic but unhelpful. Sometimes shadows or insects can trigger false alarms, he explained. Have you tried adjusting the sensitivity settings? I had. It didn't help. Night after night, the pattern continued. Always to 17 a.m. Always nothing on camera. Always an empty porch when I checked. I started dreading bedtime. I'd lie there in the dark, watching the minutes tick by on my phone, a knot of anxiety growing in my stomach as 2:17 approached. About 2 weeks in, things escalated. I was in the kitchen making tea, trying to calm my nerves, when the 2:17 alert came through. This time, when I checked the feed, I saw something. It was just for a split second, a dark shape at the edge of the frame. Could have been a person, could have been a shadow, but it was there, and then it wasn't. I dropped the phone like it had burned me, my hands shaking so bad I sloshed hot tea all over the counter. It took me a good 10 minutes to work up the courage to look at the footage again, but when I did, it was gone. The clip showed nothing but an empty porch, same as always. That was the night I stopped sleeping altogether. I'd sit up in bed, lights on, clutching a baseball bat, just waiting for that damn alert. Sometimes I'd try to beat it to the punch, opening the door at 2:16, as if I could catch whatever it was in the act. But there was never anything there. At least, not that I could see. I started noticing other things too. Objects around the house slightly out of place. The faint scent of something musty and unpleasant lingering in the air. And always, that feeling of being watched. I installed more cameras, motion sensors, even got a dog. A big, scary-looking German Shepherd named Rex. But none of it helped. Rex never barked at night. The other cameras never picked up anything. Just that one alert every night, right on schedule. My friends started to worry. I looked like hell, dark circles under my eyes, jumping at every sound. I tried to explain, but I could see the doubt in their faces. They thought I was losing it. Maybe I was. I considered moving, but the thought of packing up and finding a new place in my sleep-deprived state was overwhelming. Plus, a small, irrational part of me was afraid that whatever this was would just follow me. So I stayed, and I waited, and I watched. It was about a week ago that I decided I'd had enough. No more cowering in bed. No more panic attacks as 2:17 approached. I was going to face this thing head-on. I set up a chair on the porch, right in view of the camera. Bundled up in a warm jacket, a thermos of coffee at my side, I settled in for a long night. 11 p.m. Nothing but the distant sound of traffic and the occasional hoot of an owl. 12:30 a.m. A cat slunk by, eyeing me suspiciously before disappearing into the bushes. 1:45 a.m. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter. 2:16 a.m. My heart started to race. 1 minute to go. I leaned forward, eyes straining in the dim porch light, every muscle tense. To 17 a.m. Nothing. No alert. No motion. No mysterious figure. Just the quiet night and my own ragged breathing. I laughed, a bit hysterically. All this build-up, all this fear, and nothing happened. I must have finally scared it off, whatever it was. Feeling a mix of relief and foolishness, I stood up, stretching my stiff muscles. That's when I noticed something odd about the porch light. My shadow. It wasn't moving with me. I froze, staring at the ground. My shadow stood there, a perfect silhouette. But I was 3 feet to the left of it. Slowly, terrified of what I might see, I turned around. There, right where my shadow should have been, stood a figure. pitch black, like a hole cut in reality. It had my exact outline, down to the wisps of hair stirred by the breeze. But it wasn't me. It couldn't be me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure raised a hand, mirroring my own movement. Then it spoke, in a voice that was mine but not mine, like hearing yourself on a recording. "Thank you for the invitation," it said. "We've been waiting so long for this moment." I blinked, and suddenly it was gone. But I could feel it, inside me. A cold, alien presence settling into my body like it belonged there. I staggered inside, slamming the door behind me, ran to the bathroom, flicked on the lights, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then I saw it. A flicker in my eyes. A darkness that didn't belong. My hand moved to touch the mirror, but I hadn't told it to. My lips curled into a smile I didn't feel. "We're going to have so much fun," my reflection said. But it wasn't me speaking. Not anymore. I don't know how long I've been sitting here, staring at my phone. The presence inside me is patient. Waiting. For what? I don't know. It's 2:16 a.m. now. 1 minute to go. I can feel it stirring, eager for something. The notification is coming. I know it. But this time, I don't think it's going to be my doorbell. There are others out there, I realize. Other doorbells, other alerts, other invitations. And they're all about to be answered. Story 6. I never should have taken the last train. But how could I have known that a simple commute would turn into a descent into madness? The platform was eerily quiet as I hurried down the stairs, the echoes of my footsteps bouncing off the grimy tile walls. I'd stayed late at the office, trying to finish a project, and now I was paying the price. The digital clock above the platform blinked 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until the last train. I let out a sigh of relief as I heard the familiar rumble approaching. The train screeched to a halt, its doors sliding open with a hiss, empty. Not surprising at this hour. I stepped inside, the fluorescent lights flickering slightly as I made my way to a seat. The smell of stale air and cleaning chemicals filled my nostrils. As I settled in, fishing my earbuds out of my bag, I noticed someone else entering the car out of the corner of my eye. A man, tall and thin, wearing a dark coat despite the warm spring night. He paused for a moment, surveying the empty car, then walked directly towards me. My stomach clenched as he sat down in the seat right across from me, despite the abundance of empty spaces. I kept my eyes down, pretending to be absorbed in my phone, but I could feel his gaze on me, unwavering and intense. The doors closed, and the train lurched forward. The rhythm of the tracks creating a hypnotic soundtrack to this increasingly uncomfortable situation. After a few minutes of tense silence, I risked a glance up. The man was still staring, his face oddly blank. No, not blank. It was like his features were, shifting ever so slightly. I blinked hard, sure I was imagining things. Long night. His voice startled me, raspy and low. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Maybe if I didn't engage, he'd leave me alone. No such luck. "We all have long nights," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "Some longer than others. Some that never end." A chill ran down my spine. I looked around, desperately hoping to see another passenger, but the car remained empty save for us two. The train slowed as we approached the next station. I stood up, ready to change cars, to put some distance between myself and this unsettling stranger. But as the doors opened, more people entered. A lot more. They filed in silently, dressed in a mishmash of styles that seemed to span decades. A woman in a 1950s house dress, a man in a 1970s leisure suit, a teenager in grunge-era flannel, all of them with that same blank, slightly shifting expression, and all of them sat down around me, pressing in close despite the empty seats further down the car. My heart was pounding now, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I tried to stand, to push my way out, but found myself hemmed in. The press of bodies was suffocating, the smell of mothballs and something darker, something rotten, filling my nostrils. "Please," I managed to croak out. "I need to get off." The original man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, but we've only just begun. You wouldn't want to miss the show, would you?" As if on cue, the lights in the car began to flicker more intensely. With each flicker, I caught glimpses of changes in my fellow passengers, flesh melting and reforming, eyes multiplying, limbs elongating to impossible lengths. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all to be a dream. When I opened them, everything looked normal again, but the feeling of wrongness remained. The train plunged into a tunnel, and darkness enveloped us. In the pitch black, I felt something brush against my hand. Something cold and slimy and decidedly not human. I bit back a scream, pressing myself as far back into my seat as I could. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, the usual rhythm of the tunnels and stations completely lost. When light finally returned, I almost wished for the darkness back, because now I could see clearly what my fellow passengers had become. Their faces were no longer even vaguely human. Twisted amalgamations of features shifted and flowed like wax, eyes and mouths appearing and disappearing at random. Their bodies had grown, filling the car, limbs intertwining until I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. And they were all still staring at me. What are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The original man, or what was left of him, spoke, but his mouth didn't move. The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We are the forgotten," the voice said, "the lost, the ones who never made it home, and now neither will you." I realized with growing horror that the view outside the windows had changed. No longer the familiar tunnels of the subway system, but a vast, impossible space. Shapes that hurt my eyes to look at twisted in the void, and distant lights that might have been stars pulsed with sickly colors. "No," I said, trying to inject some strength into my voice. "This isn't real. It can't be." A chorus of laughter erupted from the monstrous passengers, the sound grating and inhuman. "Oh, but it is," the voice said. "More real than the world you left behind. A world of illusions and lies. Here we show our true faces. And soon you will too." I felt something happening to my body. A prickling sensation, starting in my fingertips and toes, slowly creeping up my limbs. I looked down and saw my hands beginning to warp and change, fingers elongating and multiplying. "No," I screamed, "for real this time." I launched myself towards the doors, not caring what might be on the other side. Anything was better than this. But the writhing mass of former passengers held me fast. I struggled, feeling my body continue to change, my mind starting to fragment. Just as I was about to give in to despair, to let the transformation take me, I saw something. A flicker of normality through the chaos. The next station platform, eerily empty but blessedly familiar. With a strength born of desperation, I tore myself free from the grasping limbs. I slammed my fist against the emergency release, the doors sliding open with a hiss. I tumbled out onto the platform, gasping for air. Behind me, I heard inhuman shrieks of rage and frustration. I ran faster than I ever have in my life. Up the stairs, through the turnstiles, out into the night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment, slamming the door behind me and collapsing on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. It took days for me to work up the courage to leave my home. Weeks before I could even look at the subway entrance without breaking into a cold sweat. I quit my job, found something closer to home. Anything to avoid taking the train again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. The rumble of a train that isn't there. And in my dreams, I'm back in that car, surrounded by those things, becoming one of them. I don't know what happened that night. If it was real, or some kind of shared hallucination, or if I simply had some kind of breakdown. But I do know this. I'll never take the last train again. And if you're smart, neither will you. Because sometimes, the thing that gets on at the next stop isn't getting off, and neither are you. Story 7. I never thought a simple 1-star review could unravel my entire life. But here I am, hiding in a motel room, jumping at every sound. All because I decided to voice my opinion about a mediocre sandwich. It started innocently enough. I'd ordered delivery from a new place in town, Midnight Bites. The name should have been my first clue, but I was working late and desperate for something other than vending machine chips. The sandwich arrived cold, the bread soggy, and don't even get me started on whatever passed for mayo. Annoyed and hangry, I fired off a scathing review on the food app. Worst sandwich I've ever had. Cold, soggy, and possibly made with ingredients older than me. Save your money and your stomach. 1 star, and that's being generous. I hit submit, feeling that little rush of petty satisfaction. Then I closed my laptop and forgot all about it. Until the messages started. The first one came the next morning. A notification from an account I didn't recognize. We're sorry you didn't enjoy your meal. Perhaps we could interest you in a special, off-menu item. I rolled my eyes and deleted it. Probably just the restaurant trying to save face. But then another message popped up, and another. All from different accounts, all with similar wording. By lunchtime, my phone was buzzing non-stop. You seem stressed. Let us help you relax. We know what you really hunger for. Come visit us. We promise you'll never want to leave. I blocked the accounts, reported them as spam, but they kept coming, faster than I could block them, and they were getting weirder. We saw you today. Blue shirt looks good on you. I froze. I was wearing a blue shirt, one I'd just bought, that I hadn't worn outside yet. My hands shaking, I closed all my social media apps. This was getting creepy. Maybe I'd been hacked. I changed all my passwords, enabled 2-factor authentication on everything. It didn't help. The messages started coming through other channels. Email, texts, even LinkedIn, for crying out loud. And they knew things they shouldn't know. How's that project going? The Henderson account, right? Bet your boss would love to know you're behind schedule. I hadn't told anyone I was struggling with that project. How could they possibly know? I started noticing other things, too. Cars that seemed to linger too long outside my apartment. Glimpses of figures ducking out of sight when I turned around. The constant feeling of being watched. Paranoia set in hard. I stopped going out unless absolutely necessary. Ordered groceries online. Worked from home as much as I could. But even in my own apartment, I didn't feel safe. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to do some digging on Midnight Bites. Their website was basic, just a menu and hours. But something about it felt off. The photos were a little too perfect, the descriptions a little too enticing. I tried to find reviews from other customers, but there was nothing. No Yelp page, no Google reviews. Just my lone one-star review, standing out like a sore thumb. As I scrolled through their social media, a chill ran down my spine. In the background of one of their photos, barely visible, was a face I recognized. My neighbor, Mrs. Goldstein. She'd gone missing a month ago. My mind reeling, I dug deeper. And the more I looked, the more faces I recognized. All people who had disappeared over the past year. All in the backgrounds of this restaurant's photos. Heart pounding, I picked up my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, a new message popped up. Digging deep, aren't we? Why don't you come see for yourself? We're always open. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. This was insane. I needed to get out, to clear my head. Grabbing my keys, I headed for the door. But as I reached for the handle, I heard something. A scratching sound, coming from the other side. Holding my breath, I peered through the peephole. The hallway was dark, but I could make out a figure. Tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body, and its face. I'll never forget that face, or rather, the lack of one. Just smooth, pale skin where features should be. I stumbled back, biting down on my fist to keep from screaming. The scratching continued, more insistent now. Then, a voice, not coming from the hallway, but from inside my own head. Let us in. We have such delicacies to show you. I ran to the bedroom, shoving a dresser in front of the door. The scratching followed, now coming from the windows. Shadows moved across the glass, shapes that shouldn't exist outside the realm of nightmares. My phone buzzed. Another message. You can't hide forever. We know your taste now. And we're very, very hungry. I don't remember much after that. Somehow, I made it out of the apartment, drove until my car ran out of gas, then kept going on foot. Now I'm here, in this dingy motel room, trying to figure out what the hell is going on. I've tried calling friends, family, but the calls won't go through. My social media accounts have been wiped clean, like I never existed. And every time I turn on the TV or radio, all I hear is static, and underneath, whispers. Promises of flavors I've never imagined, feasts beyond my wildest dreams. I'm starving, but I'm terrified to eat anything. What if they've gotten to the food somehow? What if that's how they spread, how they change people? The worst part is, a small part of me wants to give in, to go back to that restaurant and see what all the fuss is about. The hunger is getting worse, and not just for food. I'm craving something I can't even name, but I can't. I won't. Whatever Midnight Bites really is, whatever's behind all this, it's not human. And I have a feeling that if I give in, I won't be human for much longer either. So I'm writing this as a warning. Be careful what you post online. You never know who or what might be reading. And if you see a place called Midnight Bites pop up in your area, do yourself a favor. Don't order, don't review. Just run. Because once they've got a taste for you, they never stop hunting, and their appetites are endless. I can hear them now, scratching at the door. The smell of something delicious is seeping under the crack, making my mouth water despite my terror. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. If you're reading this, please help me. And whatever you do, don't leave reviews for places you don't understand. Some opinions are better left unsaid, and some appetites are better left unsatisfied. Story 8. I should have known something was off when Mrs. Abernathy complimented my lawn. In the 3 years I'd lived on Willow Lane, she'd never so much as nodded in my direction. But there she was, peering over her immaculate hedges, a smile plastered on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Lovely grass, Tom," she called out, her voice syrupy sweet. "You must share your secret." I stood there, garden hose in hand, momentarily stunned. Thanks," I managed to stammer out. "Just water, I guess?" She nodded, that eerie smile never wavering. "Water, of course. How efficient." As I watched her retreat into her house, a chill ran down my spine despite the summer heat. Something about her demeanor felt off, rehearsed almost. But I shrugged it off. Maybe the old battle axe was finally warming up to the neighborhood. If only I'd known then what that interaction really meant. If only I'd packed my bags and run while I still could. The next morning, I nearly choked on my coffee when I glanced out the kitchen window. Mr. Chun from across the street was mowing his lawn. Nothing unusual about that, except he was wearing the exact same outfit I had on yesterday, right down to the ratty Nirvana t-shirt I'd had since college. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things. But no, there he was, pushing his mower in perfectly straight lines, dressed like my carbon copy. As I watched, mouth agape, Mrs. Abernathy emerged from her house. She was wearing a floral dress I could have sworn I'd seen my wife Rachel wear last week. She waved cheerily at Mr. Chun, then started watering her already immaculate flower beds. "Hey, Rach," I called out, my voice higher than usual. You seeing this?" Rachel appeared beside me, coffee mug in hand. She took one look out the window and froze. What the hell? We stood there for a good 5 minutes, watching as more neighbors emerged. All of them dressed in outfits we recognized. All of them going about morning routines that looked eerily familiar. "Okay, this is weird," Rachel said, setting down her mug. "Like, really weird? Should we call someone?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. But as I reached for my phone, movement caught my eye. Mrs. Abernathy was staring directly at our window, that same unsettling smile on her face. She raised her hand in a cheery wave. I stumbled back, pulling Rachel with me. "On second thought," I said, "maybe we should just stay inside today." That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of steadily mounting dread and paranoia. It wasn't just the clothes. Our neighbors started mimicking our behaviors, our routines. I'd go out to get the mail at 10 a.m., and suddenly everyone on the block was doing the same. Rachel would take up knitting, and within days every woman on Willow Lane had needles in hand. We tried to break the pattern, stayed inside for days, changed up our routines, but somehow they always knew, always matched us step for step. The constant observation was driving us mad. Everywhere we looked, eyes were watching. From behind curtains, through gaps in fences, over the tops of newspapers, on Porsches. Always watching, always mimicking. We thought about leaving, but where would we go? Our jobs were here, our lives were here. And some irrational part of me was afraid that if we left, we'd find the same thing wherever we went. Things came to a head last night. We were sitting in the living room, lights off, peeking through the blinds at the silent street outside. The neighbors had taken to gathering in the evenings, standing in perfect rows on their lawns, all facing our house. "We have to do something," Rachel whispered, her hand clutching mine so tight it hurt. "This can't go on." I nodded, my mouth dry. "Tomorrow, we'll pack up and leave at dawn, before they're all out." As if they'd heard us, a change rippled through the crowd outside. As one, They all turned to face each other. And then, to our horror, they began to change. It started with Mr. Chun. His features seemed to melt, to flow like wax. In moments, he was a perfect copy of me. One by one, the others followed suit. Men, women, even children, all transforming into replicas of Rachel and me. Rachel let out a strangled sob, burying her face in my shoulder. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. When the transformation was complete, the crowd turned back to our house. Dozens of copies of Rachel and me, all wearing that same eerie smile. As one, they began to move. Slowly, inexorably, towards our front door. I snapped out of my daze, adrenaline flooding my system. We have to go. Now. We ran for the back door, not even bothering to grab anything. But as we burst into the backyard, my heart sank. They were there too, closing in from all sides. "Tom," one of my doppelgangers called out, his voice a perfect imitation of mine. "Why are you running? Don't you want to be part of the neighborhood?" Rachel's copies chimed in, their voices a chorus of her familiar tones. "It's so much better this way. No more individuality, no more standing out. Just perfect, peaceful conformity." We pressed our backs against the house, cornered like animals. The crowd drew closer, their smiles never wavering. "What do you want?" I shouted, trying to keep the terror out of my voice. They spoke in unison, the sound sending chills down my spine. "We want you to join us, to become one with the neighborhood. It's time for you to conform." I felt something then, a strange pulling sensation. Looking down, I saw my hands beginning to change, my skin rippling like water. Beside me, Rachel let out a gasp. Her features were shifting, becoming more like Mrs. S. Abernathy's. "No," I growled, fighting against the change with every ounce of will I had. "We won't become like you. We won't lose ourselves." The crowd's smiles faltered for the first time. A look of confusion passed over their identical faces. "But why?" they asked, genuine bewilderment in their voices. "Don't you want to belong? Don't you want to be like everyone else?" And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't malevolence. This was desperation. A twisted, horrifying form of loneliness and desire for connection. I grabbed Rachel's hand, relieved to feel her fingers, still her own, intertwine with mine. "We already belong," I said, surprised at the strength in my voice. "To ourselves and to each other. We don't need to change to fit in." A ripple of uncertainty passed through the crowd. Some of them began to shift back to their original forms, confusion evident on their faces. "But the neighborhood," one of them started, but I cut them off. "A real neighborhood embraces differences," I said. "It doesn't erase them." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, the transformations began to reverse. Features shifted back, clothes changed, until our lawn was once again filled with our familiar, diverse neighbors. Mrs. Moore's. Abernathy stepped forward, looking more like her old crotchy self than she had in weeks. We just wanted everyone to get along," she said, her voice small. I sighed, the adrenaline slowly draining from my system. Getting along doesn't mean becoming the same. It means accepting each other, differences and all. The crowd dispersed after that, shamefaced and quiet. Rachel and I spent the rest of the night holding each other, processing what had happened. In the days that followed, an uneasy peace settled over Willow Lane. Our neighbors were more subdued, almost shy. But slowly, tentatively, real connections began to form. Block parties were organized. Book clubs started. People began to appreciate each other for who they really were, not who they thought they should be. As for Rachel and me, we decided to stay. Someone needs to keep an eye on things, after all. And every now and then, when I catch Mrs. Abernathy eyeing my lawn with a hint of her old disapproval, I smile. Because that look, judgmental as it might be, is real. And real is so much better than perfect. But I'll tell you one thing. I'll never look at a neighborhood watch sign the same way again. Because sometimes, the ones doing the watching are the ones you really need to watch out for. Story 9. I always thought uncovering the truth would be liberating. But as I sit here, staring at my computer screen, I realize some truths are better left buried, especially when they start writing themselves. It all began with a cold case file and a desperate need for podcast content. I'm Samantha Reeves, host of Cold Case Confessions, and I was running out of material. That's when I stumbled upon the Millbrook murders, a series of unsolved killings that had terrorized a small Midwest town in the 1980s. Perfect fodder for my true crime-obsessed audience. I dove into research, poring over old newspaper clippings and police reports. The details were gruesome. 5 victims over 3 years, all found in the dense woods outside town, their bodies arranged in bizarre tableaus. The killer had never been caught, and the case had gone cold decades ago. As I recorded the first episode, laying out the basic facts of the case, I felt that familiar thrill of starting a new investigation. Little did I know, I was opening a door that should have stayed firmly shut. The first email came just hours after the episode went live. The subject line read, "You missed something." Intrigued, I opened it, expecting the usual armchair detective theories. Instead, I found a single sentence. Checked the victim's left hands. I frowned, scanning my notes. I hadn't noticed anything specific about their hands. Curious, I dug back into the case files, and there it was, a detail so small I'd overlooked it entirely. Each victim had a tiny puncture wound on their left palm, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Holy crap, I muttered, immediately firing up my microphone to record an update. This was the kind of detail listeners ate up. The next email came right after I posted the update. This time, it was a series of numbers. At first, I thought it was GPS coordinates, but when I plugged them in, nothing made sense. It wasn't until I was falling asleep that night that it hit me. They were dates. Dates that corresponded exactly to the estimated time of death for each victim. My heart raced as I cross-referenced the information. It matched perfectly. This wasn't publicly available information. Whoever was sending these emails had insider knowledge of the case. The next few weeks were a blur of recording, researching, and waiting anxiously for each new email. They came like clockwork, always containing a piece of information I hadn't known before. Details about the victims' lives, specifics about the crime scenes that hadn't been released to the public. My podcast was blowing up. Listeners were enthralled by the unfolding mystery, theories running wild in the forums. But as my subscriber count grew, so did the knot of unease in my stomach. The emails were getting more personal. Not just about the case, but about me. "You're getting close, Samantha. But are you sure you want to know the truth? That red sweater looks nice on you. Brings out the fear in your eyes." I hadn't worn that sweater for the podcast. I'd worn it to the grocery store yesterday. I started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went, jumping at every notification on my phone. I considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I was getting spooky emails, that someone might be watching me. I had no proof, nothing concrete. So I kept digging, kept recording. The story had its hooks in me now, and I couldn't let go. It was during a late-night research session that I found the connection I'd been missing. All 5 victims had worked for the same company at some point, Millbrook Pharmaceuticals. It had shut down years ago, but in the 80s, it was the town's biggest employer. Excited by the breakthrough, I started a new recording immediately, my voice breathless as I laid out the connection. As I spoke, my computer pinged with a new email. Now you're asking the right questions, but be careful. Some answers bite back. I shivered, but pressed on. This was too big to stop now. The next day, I drove out to Millbrook. The pharmaceutical plant was still there, a hulking ruin on the outskirts of town. As I approached, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something about the place felt wrong, like the air itself was charged with a malevolent energy. I was so focused on the building that I almost missed the figure watching me from the tree line. When I turned to look, it was gone. But I could have sworn I saw a flash of red, the same shade as my sweater. My hands shook as I set up my recording equipment. "This is Samantha Reeves," I said into the mic, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm standing outside the abandoned Millbrook Pharmaceuticals plant, where all 5 victims of the Millbrook murders once worked. The question is, what happened here? What were they working on that might have led to their deaths?" As if in answer, my phone buzzed. Another email. "Why don't you come inside and find out?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was insane. I should leave, call the police, end this whole thing right now. But I couldn't. I'd come too far to back out now. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the rusty door and stepped into the darkness. The interior of the plant was a maze of shadows and decay. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of broken equipment, shattered glass vials crunching under my feet. The air was thick with dust and the lingering scent of chemicals. As I moved deeper into the building, I noticed something odd. Some of the equipment looked newer, like it had been used more recently than the plant's closure date would suggest. My phone buzzed again. "You're getting warmer." Checked the basement. I found the stairs leading down, each step creaking ominously under my weight. The basement was even darker, the air heavy and damp. My flashlight beam swept across rows of filing cabinets, some so rusted they'd fused shut, but one stood out. Newer, its metal still shiny. With trembling fingers, I pulled open a drawer. Inside was a single file folder. As I opened it, a photo slipped out, landing face up on the floor. I gasped, stumbling back. It was me, a photo taken just yesterday, standing in my kitchen. On the back, written in red ink, "The final subject." My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. How could they have? A noise behind me made me whirl around. There, in the doorway, stood a figure. The red sweater, my red sweater, seemed to glow in the dim light. "Who are you?" I managed to croak out. "What do you want?" The figure stepped forward, and I caught a glimpse of its face. My face, but wrong, somehow. Older, harder, with eyes that held no trace of humanity. "Don't you recognize me, Samantha?" it said, in a voice that was mine but not mine. "I'm you. Or rather, what you become." I shook my head, backing away. "That's impossible." I laughed. "Impossible. After everything you've uncovered, you still cling to what's possible." It gestured around the room. Millbrook wasn't just making pharmaceuticals. They were experimenting with something else. Something that could reshape reality itself. My back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to run. But it went wrong. It continued. The test subjects, your victims. They were just the beginning. The formula needed refinement. Decades of refinement. Understanding dawned, horrible and complete. The emails, I whispered. The insider information. It was you all along. It nodded, a twisted smile on my face. I had to make sure you'd follow the breadcrumbs. Had to make sure you'd end up right here, right now. To complete the loop. What loop? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. The one that creates me, it said, pulling out a syringe filled with glowing blue liquid. Don't worry. It only hurts for a little while. And then, well, then you become me. And the cycle continues. As it lunged forward, I realized the horrible truth. I wasn't uncovering a story. I was becoming one. An endless loop of hunter and hunted, of past and future colliding. I'd wanted the truth, and now I had it. But some truths are better left buried, especially when they're written in your own blood. The needle pierced my skin, and I felt the burn of the liquid entering my veins. As the world began to fade, I heard my own voice. Older, colder, whisper in my ear. See you in about 40 years. The podcast is going to be a hit. Single quotes story 10. I never thought I'd be afraid of my own reflection. But when your mirror image starts living a life of its own, terror takes on a whole new meaning. It all started with a coffee mug. I came home from work one dreary Tuesday, dragging myself up the 3 flights to my cramped studio apartment. As I fumbled for my keys, I noticed something odd. The welcome mat was slightly askew, just an inch or 2 off from its usual spot. I muttered, too tired to give it much thought. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the neighbor's cat or my own absent-mindedness. But as I pushed open the door, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt off. The air smelled different, a faint whiff of unfamiliar cologne lingering in the stuffy space. My eyes darted around, taking in the familiar clutter of my bachelor pad. Everything seemed to be in its place, and yet, there, on the kitchen counter, my favorite mug, the chipped one with the faded Nirvana logo, was sitting in a different spot. I always left it by the coffee maker, but now it was next to the sink, a faint ring of coffee still visible inside. What the hell? I whispered, my exhaustion evaporating in a surge of adrenaline. Had someone been in my apartment? I did a quick sweep, checking behind the shower curtain, in the closet, under the bed. Nothing. I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness. Maybe I'd moved the mug this morning in my pre-coffee haze. Yeah, that had to be it. But as the days went by, more little things started to add up. The TV remote on the left side of the coffee table instead of the right. My toothbrush slightly damp when I went to use it in the morning. The window cracked open a hair when I was sure I'd closed it the night before. Each incident on its own was nothing, but together they formed a pattern that was starting to freak me out. I installed a nanny cam, hiding it in a stack of books on the shelf. But when I checked the footage, there was nothing. Just hours of an empty apartment, everything staying exactly where it was supposed to be. And yet, when I came home, things would be different. Subtle changes, always just on the edge of what I could definitively prove wasn't my own doing. I started taking photos before I left for work, meticulously documenting the position of every object. And sure enough, when I returned, little things would be off. A book tilted at a different angle. The fruit bowl rotated a few degrees. The final straw came about 2 weeks in. I was getting ready for bed, brushing my teeth in front of the bathroom mirror. As I leaned in to spit, I could have sworn I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Not my own reflection, but something behind me in the bedroom. I whirled around, heart pounding, but the bedroom was empty, exactly as I'd left it. Shaken, I turned back to the mirror and froze. For just a split second, my reflection was wrong. The eyes were open when mine were blinking. The mouth curved in a slight smile I wasn't making. I stumbled back, blinking hard. When I looked again, everything was normal. Just my own pale, frightened face staring back at me. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every distant siren had me bolt upright, sure that someone or something was in the apartment with me. The next day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving, of coming back to find more evidence that someone else was living in my space when I wasn't there. I spent the day poring over the nanny cam footage, checking and rechecking every frame, but there was nothing. Just hours of an empty apartment, mocking me with its stillness. As night fell, exhaustion finally overtook me. I must have dozed off on the couch, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to darkness. The digital clock on the microwave read 3:17 a.m. Something had woken me up. A sound, a movement. I lay there, barely breathing, straining my ears. There, a soft creak from the kitchen. The sound of a cabinet opening, so quiet I might have missed it if I wasn't hyper-aware of every noise. My heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. I slowly turned my head. A figure stood in the kitchen, silhouetted against the dim light from the window. My height, my build. It was rummaging through the fridge, movements casual and familiar, like it belonged there. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, I'm not sure. But suddenly, the figure stiffened. It turned, and in the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds, I saw its face. My face, but wrong, somehow. The features were mine, but the expression, it was like looking at a mask of myself, being worn by something that didn't quite know how to make it move right. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Me, frozen on the couch. It, standing in my kitchen, a carton of orange juice halfway to its lips. Then it smiled. A wide, too wide smile that stretched the limits of what a human face should be capable of. "Hello, Rumi," it said, in a voice that was mine, but not mine. "Fancy meeting you here." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't respond, paralyzed by terror and disbelief. Me, chuckled, taking a swig of orange juice straight from the carton. "Oh, don't look so surprised. You've known I was here for weeks. All those little clues you kept noticing. That was me, trying to ease you into the idea." It walked towards me, movements fluid and unnatural. I wanted to run, to fight, to do something. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to do anything but watch as this impossible thing with my face drew closer. "You see," it continued, crouching down so its face was inches from mine, "I've been waiting a long time for a place like this. A life like yours. It's not much, but it's cozy, comfortable." It reached out, running a finger down my cheek. Its touch was cold, sending shivers of revulsion through me. "I tried to be considerate," it said, its tone almost sad. "Thought we could share. I'd live here while you were away, slip back into the shadows when you returned. But you had to go and notice, didn't you? Had to start asking questions?" Single quotes. Finally, I found my voice. What are you?" I managed to croak out. Its smile widened, impossibly wide. "I'm you. Or rather, what you could be. A version of you unburdened by all those pesky human limitations. Morals, empathy, the need to sleep. It stood up, stretching in a way that made its joints pop and crack in ways that bones shouldn't move. But now, well, I'm afraid there's only room for one of us here, and I've grown quite fond of this life. Terror gave me strength. I leaped up, making a dash for the door, but it was faster, impossibly fast. In the blink of an eye, it was there, blocking my path. Now, it tisked, shaking my head in a parody of disappointment. Let's not make this difficult. I promise it won't hurt. Much as it lunged for me, I did the only thing I could think of. I ran for the bathroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. I could hear it laughing on the other side, a sound that was my laugh but twisted, warped into something inhuman. "You can't hide in there forever," it called out, its voice muffled by the door. "I've got all the time in the world. And when you come out, well, let's just say, there'll be a few changes around here." I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, heart racing. What the hell was happening? How could this be real? As I sat there, trying to calm my breathing, my eyes fell on the bathroom mirror. And in that moment, I realized the true horror of my situation. Because in the mirror, I saw nothing. No reflection. Just an empty bathroom. Whatever that thing out there was, it hadn't just stolen my face. It had stolen my very existence. I don't know how long I've been in here. Hours, days. Time seems to have lost all meaning. I can hear it out there, living my life. Answering my phone, talking to my friends and family in my voice. Taking over my existence, piece by piece. And the worst part, I'm starting to forget what I looked like before. My memories are fading, replaced by images of that thing's too wide smile and impossible movements. I know I can't stay in here forever. Eventually, I'll have to face it, to fight for my life, my identity. But as I sit here, listening to it hum tunelessly in my voice as it makes breakfast in my kitchen, I wonder, will there be anything left of me to save? So, if you ever come home and things seem slightly off, pay attention. Check your reflection, make sure it blinks when you do. Because you never know when something might be trying on your life for size. And once it fits, it might decide to keep it. Story 11. I always thought seeing double was just a figure of speech, until the day I saw myself across a crowded street, and my world split in two. It was a Tuesday, unremarkable in every way. I was hurrying down Fifth Avenue, jostling through the usual throng of tourists and business people. The aroma of street vendor hot dogs mingled with car exhaust, creating that uniquely New York potpourri. I was running late for a meeting, my mind a whirlwind of presentation points and client names. That's when I saw her. Me. At first, it was just a glimpse. A flash of familiar auburn hair in the crowd across the street. I did a double take, nearly colliding with a hurried-looking man in a suit. There, waiting at the crosswalk, was me. Same hair, same green coat, same bewildered expression I'm sure I was wearing. I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things. When I looked again, she was gone, swallowed up by the sea of pedestrians as the light changed. "Get it together, Alexis," I muttered, shaking my head. Lack of sleep and too much caffeine were clearly messing with my mind. I pushed the incident out of my thoughts, focusing on my upcoming meeting. But as I sat in the conference room later, nodding along to budget projections, I couldn't shake the image of my own face staring back at me from across the street. That night, as I scrolled through my phone before bed, a notification popped up. A new email, sender unknown. The subject line made my blood run cold. "Did you see me today?" With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a single photo. Me, on Fifth Avenue, looking shocked and confused. Taken from across the street, exactly where I'd seen myself. I dropped the phone like it had burned me, my heart pounding. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of prank, a clever bit of Photoshop. But deep down, I knew. The look on my face in that photo was too real, too raw to be faked. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. By the time my alarm blared, I was a jittery mess of exhaustion and paranoia. I seriously considered calling in sick, but the thought of staying alone in my apartment was somehow worse than facing the outside world. So I dragged myself through my morning routine, jumping at every shadow, scrutinizing every reflective surface. The workday passed in a blur of anxiety and distraction. Every glimpse of red hair, every green coat had me whirling around, half expecting to see myself staring back. My co-workers noticed, shooting me concerned looks, but I waved off their questions with mumbled excuses about too much coffee. It was on my way home, as I hurried through the subway station, that I saw her again. Just for a moment, as the train pulled away. My own face in the window of the next car, watching me with an unreadable expression. I stumbled back, bumping into other commuters who grumbled their annoyance. By the time I pushed my way to where I'd seen her, the train was gone, leaving me standing alone on the platform, heart racing. That night, another email arrived. Another photo, this time of me on the subway platform, looking pale and terrified. The message read, "We need to talk." I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking so bad I could barely type. This was insane. I was losing my mind. That had to be it. But the next day brought more sightings. A glimpse in a store window. A face in the crowd that was there and gone in an instant. Always just out of reach. Always watching. The emails kept coming. Photos of me going about my day, in places I didn't remember being photographed. Messages that were cryptic yet unnervingly personal. Remember that red dress you loved as a kid? The one with the butterflies? Mum always said you had her eyes, but whose eyes do I have? I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. My world narrowed to a pinpoint of paranoia and fear. Every mirror became a potential portal. Every reflective surface, a window to... what? Another version of me. A twin I never knew I had. It was a week into this waking nightmare when things escalated. I was at work, trying to focus on a spreadsheet, when my phone buzzed. Another email. I opened it, my stomach churning with dread. It was a video this time. Shaky camera work, clearly taken from a handheld phone. It showed my apartment, my living room, my kitchen, my bedroom, all empty. Then the camera turned, revealing the bathroom mirror. And there she was. Me. But not me. Subtle differences I couldn't quite put my finger on. A hardness to the eyes, a set to the jaw that I didn't recognize. I smiled at the camera, spoke in my voice, but with an inflection I'd never heard from my own lips. It's time we met, Alexis. Face to face. Come home, now. The video cut out. I sat there, staring at my dark phone screen, my reflection a pale, terrified ghost. I don't remember leaving the office. Don't remember the subway ride or the walk to my building. I just found myself standing outside my apartment door, key in hand, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. I had to know. I pushed open the door, stepping into my apartment. Everything looked normal. Tidy living room, dishes in the sink from this morning's rushed breakfast. but the air felt different, charged, somehow, like the moment before a lightning strike. "Hello," I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. Is anyone here?" "In here," came the reply. My voice, but not, coming from the bathroom. On legs that felt like lead, I approached the bathroom door. It was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the hallway. With a trembling hand, I pushed it open. There she was. Me, but not me. Standing by the sink, casual as can be, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Hello, Alexis," she said, smiling that smile I'd seen in the video. "It's nice to finally meet you, face to face." I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind reeling. Up close, the differences were more apparent. Her hair was a shade darker, her eyes a touch greener. She stood with a confidence I'd always wished I had. "Who? What are you?" I managed to croak out. She chuckled, the sound unnervingly familiar yet foreign. "I'm you, Alexis. Or rather, a version of you. The you that could have been, if you'd made different choices." I shook my head, backing away. "That's impossible. You can't be real." "Oh, I'm very real," she said, taking a step towards me. "As real as you are. Maybe more so." She reached out, her fingers brushing my arm. Her touch was warm, solid. Not a hallucination, not a trick of the light. "How?" I whispered, my back hitting the wall. There was nowhere left to retreat. She shrugged, a gesture so familiar it made my head spin. "Does it matter? I'm here. I've always been here, just out of sight, watching, waiting. For what?" Her smile widened, showing too many teeth. "For my turn, of course. You've had your chance at this life, Alexis. Now it's mine." Understanding dawned, horrible and complete. "You want to replace me?" I said, my voice barely audible. She nodded, looking almost sympathetic. "It's nothing personal. It's just, I think I could do it better. Live your life, our life, the way it was meant to be lived." "No," I said, surprised at the strength in my voice. "This is my life. You can't have it." For a moment, her facade cracked. A flash of anger quickly smoothed over. "Don't be difficult, Alexis. It'll be easier if you just accept it. After all, how do you know you're the original? Maybe I'm the real Alexis, and you're the pale imitation." The words hit me like a physical blow, because deep down, in some dark corner of my mind, I'd been wondering the same thing. How could I be sure of anything anymore? We stood there, mirror images facing off, the air thick with tension. I knew I should run, should call for help. But who would believe me? And where could I go that she couldn't follow? As if reading my thoughts, she smiled again. "There's no escape, Alexis. No way out. It's just you and me now. And soon, it'll just be me." She took another step forward, and I saw my own face twisted with a hunger I'd never known. A hunger for my life, my very existence. I'd like to say I fought back, that I found some hidden reserve of strength and stood my ground. But the truth is, I ran. Fled my own apartment like the devil himself was on my heels. And in a way, I suppose she was. I'm in a motel now, writing this down in case. In case I don't make it. In case she wins. Because I can feel her out there, watching, waiting, wearing my face, my life, like a costume she's eager to try on. So if you see me on the street, or at work, or anywhere, look closely. Make sure it's really me. Because somewhere out there, there's another Alexis. And she's hungry for a life that isn't hers. Just remember, not every reflection is your own. And sometimes, the person staring back at you from the mirror isn't you at all. Story 12. I've always been one for shortcuts. Why take the long way when there's a quicker path, right? But after what happened last Tuesday, I'm starting to think the scenic route might be worth the extra time. Because some shortcuts don't just cut distance, they cut through reality itself. It started innocently enough. I was running late for a dinner with my girlfriend Sarah. Traffic was a nightmare, brake lights stretching as far as the eye could see. That's when I remembered the old neighborhood my buddy Mike had mentioned. A maze of side streets that supposedly shaved 15 minutes off the crosstown commute. What the hell, I muttered, yanking the wheel to the right. My GPS squawked in protest, but I ignored it. I'd rather be a few minutes late than an hour. The transition was subtle at first. The modern high-rises gave way to older brownstones, their facades worn but charming. The air seemed different too, crisper somehow, with a faint scent of wood smoke that seemed out of place for a muggy July evening. I cruised down narrow streets, following Mike's directions from memory. Left, right, another right. The buildings grew older, more Victorian in style. Gas lamps flickered on street corners, which I found quaint. Some historical preservation thing, probably. It wasn't until I saw the horse-drawn carriage that I started to feel uneasy. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things. But no, there it was. A gleaming black carriage, complete with a top-hatted driver. He tipped his hat as I drove by, seemingly unperturbed by my very modern car. Okay, this is weird, I said aloud, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I fumbled for my phone, meaning to call Sarah, but the screen was dead. No signal, not even an emergency bar. I looked up, intending to turn around, but the street behind me had changed. Where there had been an intersection was now an unbroken row of townhouses, their windows glowing with warm gaslight. My heart began to race. This wasn't possible. I must have taken a wrong turn, gotten myself lost somehow. But as I drove on, hoping to find a main road, things only got stranger. The pavement beneath my tires transformed into cobblestones. The few people I saw were dressed in clothing straight out of the 1800s. They stared at my car with a mixture of fear and awe, some crossing themselves as I passed. I was full on panicking now, my breath coming in short gasps. I took turn after turn, but each street looked the same. Gaslights, cobblestones, horse-drawn carriages. It was like I'd driven straight into the past. Just as I was about to abandon my car and make a run for it, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. There, in the middle of the street, was a woman. But not just any woman. It was Sarah. She stood there, illuminated by the flickering gas lights, wearing a high-collared Victorian dress. Her hair was done up in an elaborate style I'd never seen on her before. But it was undeniably her face, her eyes. I rolled down the window, my voice shaky. Sarah, what the hell is going on? She tilted her head, a puzzled expression on her face. When she spoke, her voice was familiar yet strange, with an accent I couldn't place. I beg your pardon, sir. Have we been introduced? I gaped at her, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. Sarah, it's me. It's Jack, your boyfriend. We were supposed to meet for dinner, remember? Her brow furrowed, a flicker of recognition passing across her face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a polite smile. I'm afraid you must have me confused with someone else, sir. My name is indeed Sarah, but I assure you we've never met. And I'm certainly not What did you call it? Your girlfriend. She said the word like it was foreign, almost scandalous. I opened my mouth to argue, to try and jog her memory, but a commotion down the street caught my attention. A crowd was gathering, pointing and muttering. Some were shouting about devil's work and witchcraft. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in my car, really seeing it for the first time. What manner of contraption is this? She whispered, taking a step back. I knew I had to get out of there, fast, but I couldn't leave Sarah, or whoever this woman was, who looked exactly like her. Look, I know this sounds crazy, but you have to come with me. Something's very wrong here, and I think we're both in danger. She hesitated, glancing back at the approaching crowd. I could see the conflict in her eyes. Fear of the unknown versus fear of the angry mob. Finally, she nodded. Very well. But I warn you, sir, if this is some sort of trickery. It's not, I swear, I said, reaching across to open the passenger door. Just get in. Please. She climbed in awkwardly, her voluminous skirts filling the seat. I gunned the engine, eliciting screams from the crowd, and peeled out down the cobblestone street. As we drove, I tried to explain about the shortcut, about the world I came from, about us. Sarah listened with wide eyes, occasionally touching the dashboard or the radio with wonder. This is impossible, she breathed. And yet I cannot deny the evidence before my eyes. I was about to respond when something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. The world behind us was shifting, like reality itself was unraveling. The Victorian streets melting away to reveal glimpses of modern New York. Hold on, I said, pressing the gas pedal to the floor. I think I know how to get us out of here. We tore through the streets, the world around us flickering like a faulty film projection. Victorian London one moment, 1950s America the next, then back to gaslit cobblestones. Sarah clung to the door handle, her face a mask of terror and awe. Just when I thought we were lost for good, I saw it. The intersection where I'd first turned off. Modern skyscrapers loomed beyond, solid and real. Almost there, I said through gritted teeth. Just a little further. We burst through the boundary like crashing through a membrane. Suddenly, we were back in modern New York, horns blaring as I swerved to avoid the rush hour traffic. I pulled over, my hands shaking so bad I could barely put the car in park. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, slowly, I turned to look at Sarah. She was back to normal. Jeans, t-shirt, her hair in its usual messy bun. She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling. "What? What just happened?" I was waiting at the restaurant, and then suddenly I was somewhere else. Somewhere else. I let out a shaky laugh, relief washing over me. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but as I recounted our impossible journey, I could see the memories returning to her. The Victorian streets, the angry mob, the wild ride through shifting realities. How is this possible? She whispered when I finished. I shook my head. I don't know. But I do know one thing. I'm never taking a shortcut again. We drove to the restaurant in silence, both of us trying to process what had happened. As we pulled into the parking lot, Sarah turned to me, her face serious. "Jack, do you think it's still there, that other world?" I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see gaslights and cobblestones. But there was only the familiar New York skyline. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm not sure I want to find out." As we walked into the restaurant, hand in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd brushed up against something vast and unknowable. A reminder that the world, or worlds, are stranger than we can imagine. So the next time you're tempted by a shortcut, think twice. Because you never know where or when you might end up. And the quickest route isn't always the one that leads you home. Story 13. I used to think being trapped in an elevator was the worst that could happen. Now I know there are far more terrifying things than being stuck between floors. Sometimes the real horror is who's trapped in there with you. It was a Friday night, and I was burning the midnight oil at Pinnacle Insurance. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over my cubicle as I pored over spreadsheets. The office was a ghost town, everyone else having bailed for the weekend hours ago. As the clock ticked past 11 p.m., I finally admitted defeat. No amount of number crunching was going to salvage this disaster of a quarter. Sighing, I gathered my things and headed for the elevator. The doors slid open with a cheerful ding that felt out of place in the eerie silence of the deserted office. I stepped in, jabbing the button for the parking garage. As the doors began to close, I caught a glimpse of movement in the lobby mirror. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw someone standing right behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, but the elevator was empty. Just my frazzled nerves playing tricks on me. The elevator lurched into motion, and I leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably Sarah, wondering why I wasn't home yet. But the text that lit up my screen wasn't from my wife. It was from an unknown number. Having a late night Mike. I froze, staring at the message. How did they know my name? And more importantly, how did they know I was still at the office? Before I could process it, another text came through. You're not alone in there, you know. A chill ran down my spine. I looked around the small elevator car, but it was still empty. Just me and my reflection in the mirrored walls. I was about to dismiss it as a prank when the elevator shuddered to a halt. The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. Emergency lights kicked in a moment later, bathing the car in an eerie red glow. Great, I muttered, jabbing at the call button. Just great. No response. The little speaker remained stubbornly silent. I tried my phone, but there was no signal. Of course, I was contemplating whether to start yelling for help when my phone buzzed again. How was I getting texts with no signal? Looks like you're stuck. Don't worry, I'll keep you company. My heart was racing now. This had to be some kind of sick joke. Maybe one of the IT guys hacking into the elevator systems. Who is this? I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. How are you doing this? The response came almost instantly. I'm closer than you think, Mike. Much closer. As I read the words, a movement caught my eye. In the mirrored wall, just over my shoulder, I saw something. A flicker of a face that wasn't mine. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just my own pale, frightened reflection staring back at me. Stop it, I said aloud, my voice shaky in the confined space. This isn't funny. Another text. Oh, I'm not trying to be funny, Mike. I'm just trying to get to know you. After all, we're going to be spending a lot of time together. I slammed my hand against the emergency call button again, holding it down. Hello? Is anyone there? I'm stuck in the elevator, and I think someone's in here with me. Nothing but silence. My phone buzzed again. They can't hear you, Mike. It's just you and me now. I slid down to the floor, my back pressed against the cool metal wall. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But the texts kept coming, each one more unsettling than the last. Remember that time you cheated on your calculus final in college? I do. Your wife's birthday is next week. You forgot to buy a gift again, didn't you? That rash on your back, that you're too embarrassed to see a doctor about. It's not what you think it is. How could they know these things? Things I'd never told anyone, secrets I'd buried deep. Hours seemed to pass, though my watch insisted it had only been 45 minutes. The texts became more personal, more invasive, dredging up memories I'd long suppressed, fears I'd never voiced aloud. I was a mess, alternating between angry demands for answers and pleading for it to stop. But the entity on the other end was relentless. Then came the message that made my blood run cold. Want to see what I look like, Mike? Before I could respond, my phone's camera app opened on its own. The front-facing camera activated, showing my terrified face in the dim red light. But as I watched, horrified, something began to change. My features started to shift, to melt and reform. It was subtle at first, a twitch of the eye, a quirk of the lips that I hadn't made. Then more dramatic. My eyes darkened, my smile widened to impossible proportions. Within seconds, the face on the screen was no longer mine, but it was still there, grinning at me with too many teeth, its eyes black as pitch. I dropped the phone with a strangled cry, scrambling to the opposite corner of the elevator, but I couldn't escape the mirrored walls. Everywhere I looked, that face was there, watching me, grinning that impossible grin. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. The answer came not as a text, but as a voice. My voice, but twisted, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I'm you, Mike. The you that you hide from the world. The you that knows all your dirty little secrets." I shook my head, pressing my hands over my ears. "No, you're not real. You can't be." A laugh, cold and mirthless. "Oh, I'm very real. I've always been here, lurking just beneath the surface. And now, thanks to this little elevator ride, I'm finally free." The voice was coming from inside my head now, drowning out my own thoughts. "All those lies you've told, all those secrets you've kept, they've been feeding me, Mike, making me stronger. And now, I'm strong enough to take control." I felt something then, a strange pulling sensation, like my very essence was being drained away. I looked down at my hands and gasped in horror. They were becoming transparent, fading away before my eyes. In the mirrors, my reflection was changing, becoming more solid, more real, while I felt myself becoming less so. "Stop," I cried out, my voice barely a whisper now. "Please, I'll do anything. Just make it stop." The thing wearing my face smiled, a cruel twist of lips. "Oh, Mike. It's already done." Just then, the elevator lurched back to life. The lights flickered on, harsh and bright after the red gloom. I blinked, disoriented. The doors slid open, revealing the parking garage. And there, waiting by my car, was my wife, Sarah. "Mike," she called out, looking concerned. "Are you okay? I've been trying to call you for hours." I stepped out of the elevator on shaky legs, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it all just a nightmare? A stress-induced hallucination? But as I approached Sarah, I felt different, like I was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. My movements felt jerky, unnatural. "I'm fine," I heard myself say, but the voice didn't sound quite right. "Just got stuck in the elevator for a bit. No big deal." Sarah frowned, studying my face. "Are you sure? You look different," I smiled, feeling my lips stretch a little too wide. "Never better. Shall we go home?" As we walked to the car, I caught my reflection in the window. For just a second, I saw that other face, my true face. staring back at me in horror, trapped behind the eyes of the thing that had taken my place. Then it was gone, replaced by the smiling mask I now wore. I climbed into the driver's seat, watching as Sarah buckled herself in beside me. She had no idea she was sitting next to a stranger wearing her husband's skin. As I started the engine, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. One last message from an unknown number. "Enjoy your new life, Mike." "I know I will." I pulled out of the parking garage, leaving behind the old Mike in the elevator that had changed everything. Ahead lay a whole new life, full of possibilities and secrets. After all, everyone has a dark side. Mine just happened to take over. So the next time you're alone in an elevator, take a good look in the mirror. The face staring back at you might not be your own, and the texts you receive, well, they might just be coming from inside the car. Story 14. I never thought a simple spare key could unlock doors to places that shouldn't exist. But here I am, trapped in a nightmare of my own making, all because of a small piece of metal I found hidden behind a loose brick. It started the day I moved into my new apartment, a quaint little studio on the 3rd floor of an old brownstone in Brooklyn. The kind of place with character, my realtor had said. If only I'd known what kind of character she meant. I was unpacking boxes when I noticed it. A brick in the wall next to the radiator that stuck out just a hair more than the others. Curiosity got the better of me, and I gave it a gentle push. To my surprise, it slid out easily, revealing a small cavity behind it. And there, nestled in a bed of decades-old dust, was a key. It was old, the brass tarnished and worn. The teeth were cut in an intricate pattern I'd never seen before. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight, wondering what secrets it might unlock. "Huh?" I muttered, pocketing the key. "Might come in handy someday." Little did I know how true, and how terrifying that statement would turn out to be. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another quirk of an old building. But a few days later, as I was leaving for work, I realized I'd locked myself out. My keys sat on the kitchen counter, visible through the window, mocking me. That's when I remembered the spare key in my jacket pocket. "Worth a shot," I shrugged, slipping it into the lock. To my amazement, it turned smoothly. The door swung open, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Crises averted. It wasn't until I was halfway down the hall that I realized something was off. The wallpaper, which had been a faded floral print, was now a rich burgundy. The lights, usually harsh fluorescents, cast a warm, golden glow. I turned back to my apartment, heart pounding. The number on the door was the same, but everything else was different. Richer, older, like I'd stepped back in time. Swallowing hard, I pushed the door open again. Instead of my cluttered studio, I found myself looking into a luxurious parlor straight out of the 1920s. A crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow prisms across velvet furnishings. "What the hell?" I whispered, stepping inside. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click. When I tried to open it again, it was locked. The key, which had worked moments ago, now did nothing. Panic rising in my throat, I explored the apartment. It was huge, far larger than the building's dimensions should have allowed. Each room was more opulent than the last, filled with antiques and artwork that belonged in a museum. As I wandered, I began to notice things. A half-empty glass of whiskey on a side table, ice cubes not yet melted. A record player, the vinyl still spinning silently. It was as if the occupants had vanished mid-evening, leaving everything behind. That's when I heard it. A faint scratching sound, coming from behind a heavy oak door at the end of the hall. My heart pounding, I approached slowly. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. Against my better judgment, I reached for the handle. The door swung open easily, revealing my apartment. My real apartment, exactly as I'd left it. I could see my keys on the counter, my half-unpacked boxes. Relief washed over me. It had all been some sort of strange hallucination. Lack of sleep and the stress of moving playing tricks on my mind. I stepped through the doorway and found myself in yet another unfamiliar room. This one was sterile, white, with machines beeping softly and the sharp scent of disinfectant in the air. A hospital room, but unlike any I'd ever seen. A figure lay in the bed, hooked up to various monitors. As I approached, my blood ran cold. The patient was me, or rather, a much older version of me. My hair was grey, my face lined with age, but it was unmistakably my own features. The older me opened his eyes, fixing me with a gaze that seemed to look right through me. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "Not yet." Before I could respond, the room began to fade away, like mist burning off in the morning sun. I blinked and found myself back in the 1920s parlor. My hands shaking, I fumbled for the key. This time, when I tried the front door, it opened. I practically fell into the hallway, gasping for breath. Everything was back to normal. The faded wallpaper, the fluorescent lights. My apartment, when I checked, was just as I'd left it. I should have gotten rid of the key then and there. Should have thrown it away, or better yet, put it back where I'd found it and sealed up that brick for good. But I didn't. Because now I knew there were other places out there. Other versions of my apartment, of myself. And part of me, God help me, wanted to see more. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed. I'd use the key at different times of day, on different doors in the building. Each time, it opened up a new, impossible space. I saw my apartment as it might have been in the 50s, all mid-century, modern, and atomic age optimism. I saw it in some dystopian future, the windows sealed against a toxic atmosphere outside. Once, I even opened a door to find an arsed underwater grotto. Fish swimming past portholes that should have looked out onto a Brooklyn street. But it was the versions with other mez that really got to me. I saw myself as I might have been, had I made different choices. A successful CEO, a struggling artist, once, horrifyingly, a corpse, long dead in a bathtub. I knew it was dangerous, knew I was toying with things beyond my understanding, but I couldn't stop. It was like a drug, each new discovery more intoxicating than the last. That's when the notes started appearing. The first one I found slipped under my door. Real door, real apartment. A scrap of yellowed paper with spidery handwriting. Stop looking. For your own sake and ours. I crumpled it up, telling myself it was a prank. But deep down, I knew. Somehow, the other versions of me, the ones in those other places, they knew what I was doing. And they weren't happy about it. More notes followed. Warnings, pleas, threats. I found them everywhere. In my mailbox, my refrigerator, once even tucked into the pocket of a jacket I'd just bought. You're tearing at the fabric of reality. Each door you open weakens the barriers. For the love of God, stop before it's too late. I tried to ignore them. Told myself it was all in my head, some kind of mental breakdown brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But the incident last night, that I can't explain away. I came home late, fumbling with my regular keys. But when the door swung open, it wasn't my apartment on the other side. It was everything, all at once. A swirling vortex of rooms and realities, overlapping and shifting. I saw flashes of all the places I'd visited, and countless more I hadn't. And in the center of it all, a figure. Me, but not me. 1,000 versions of myself, all merged into one impossible being. It turned to look at me, its faces a constantly shifting mass of my own features. "You've gone too far," it said, in a voice that was a chorus of my own. "You've weakened the barriers between worlds. If you don't stop, everything will collapse." I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding. When I opened it again, with shaking hands, my normal apartment was there. But now I know the truth. The walls between realities are thin and getting thinner, and it's all my fault. I'm writing this as a warning. If you find a strange key, a door that shouldn't be there, don't use it. Don't open it. Some doors are meant to stay locked, some barriers unbroken. Because once you start peeking behind the curtain of reality, you might not like what peeks back. And worse, you might not be able to close the door again. I can hear them now, scratching at my door. All the other versions of me, trying to get in. Or maybe, trying to get out. The key sits on my table, gleaming in the lamplight. I know I should destroy it, but I can't bring myself to do it. Because what if I need to escape? What if this reality becomes unbearable and I need a way out? But with each passing moment, I'm less and less sure which reality is mine anymore. And I'm terrified that soon it won't matter. Because soon they might all collapse into one. So if you hear a knock on your door tonight, don't answer it. It might be you on the other side. And trust me, that's one visitor you don't want to let in. Story 15. I used to think the camera never lies. Now I know better. Sometimes the most terrifying lies are the ones you see with your own eyes. It started with a notification, a simple ping from my phone that would unravel my entire life. I was grading papers in my classroom after school, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across empty desks, when my screen lit up. "James Wilson tagged you in a video." I frowned, tapping the notification. James was a colleague, a fellow history teacher at Oakwood High. We were friendly, but not the type to tag each other in social media posts. The video loaded, and my blood ran cold. It was me, or rather, someone who looked exactly like me. Same brown hair, same green eyes, same small scar on my chin from a childhood bike accident. But the words coming out of my mouth, they weren't mine. "Hello, students," my doppelganger said, a sinister smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Today's lesson is on the art of deception. And trust me, I'm an expert." The video cut to scenes that made my stomach churn. Me, or this version of me, doing things I'd never dream of. Accepting envelopes of cash from students. Drinking in my classroom. Worse, I slammed my phone face down on the desk, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of sick joke. A prank gone too far. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone again. The comments section was already filling up. Students, parents, colleagues, all expressing shock, disgust, calling for my immediate firing. I scrolled frantically, trying to explain. This isn't me. It's fake. It has to be. But my protests were drowned out in a sea of outrage. And with each passing minute, the video spread further. Shared, retweeted, picked up by local news sites. By the time I made it to the principal's office, my fate was already sealed. "I'm sorry, David," Principal Simmons said, not meeting my eyes. "But given the evidence, we have to suspend you pending a full investigation." "Evidence," I sputtered. "It's not real. Can't you see that?" She sighed, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. "We've contacted the police. In the meantime, I suggest you get a lawyer." I left in a daze, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed me through the halls. My phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from friends, family, all asking some variation of, "Is it true?" That night was a blur of frantic phone calls and sleepless paranoia. I tried to explain to anyone who would listen that the video was fake, but the doubt in their voices was clear. After all, seeing is believing, right? It wasn't until the next morning, as I sat at my kitchen table staring into a cold cup of coffee, that I got the message that would change everything. I know the truth. Meet me at Riverside Park, 2 p.m. Come alone. The sender was anonymous, the number blocked. Every instinct told me it was a trap, but what choice did I have? My life was already in shambles. What more did I have to lose? The park was nearly empty when I arrived, a chilly breeze rustling the autumn leaves. I sat on a bench, my eyes darting around nervously. "Professor Wilson." I turned to see a young woman approaching. Early 20s, short dark hair, eyes that darted around as nervously as mine. "I'm Zoe," she said, sitting down beside me. I think I know what's happening to you, because it happened to me too." Over the next hour, Zoe unfolded a tale that sounded like something out of a sci-fi thriller. A shadowy organization using cutting-edge AI to create hyper-realistic deepfakes. Their targets: educators, journalists, anyone with the power to shape young minds. "They're trying to discredit people like us," Zoe explained, her voice low. "Replace us with more compliant versions. Ones that will teach what they want taught." I shook my head, trying to process it all. But why? What's their endgame? Zoe's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Control. Over information, over truth itself. If you can't trust what you see or hear, you'll believe whatever they tell you to believe. As crazy as it sounded, it made a twisted kind of sense, and it explained the eerie perfection of the deep fake. This wasn't some prankster with a video editing app. This was state-of-the-art tech, wielded with terrifying precision. "So what do we do?" I asked, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. Zoe pulled out a laptop, her fingers flying over the keys. "We fight back, with their own weapons." Over the next few weeks, Zoe taught me everything she knew about deepfake technology, how to spot the subtle signs of manipulation, the tiny glitches that gave them away, and more importantly, how to create our own. It felt wrong, fighting deception with more deception. But as Zoe pointed out, we were in a war for the truth itself. Sometimes you had to fight fire with fire. We worked tirelessly, creating videos that exposed the conspiracy. Deepfakes of the deepfakers, if you will. Each one contained hidden clues, breadcrumbs for those willing to look deeper. But as our counteroffensive gained traction, things took a darker turn. It started with strange noises in my apartment. Footsteps when I was alone, whispered conversations just on the edge of hearing. I'd wake up to find things moved, documents on my computer altered. Then came the sightings. Glimpses of myself in impossible places. Security camera footage of me in other cities, at times when I knew I was home. My phone would ping with notifications of posts I never made, emails I never sent. "They're gaslighting you," Zoe explained when I told her, her face grim. "Trying to make you doubt your own reality." And it was working. I found myself second-guessing everything. Were my memories real, or had they been implanted somehow? Was I really who I thought I was? The final straw came last night. I was up late, poring over some new evidence Zoe had uncovered, when my phone buzzed. A video call from an unknown number. I answered, and found myself staring at me, but not the deepfake version. This was me, right now, in my apartment. I could see the same messy desk, the same half-empty cup of coffee. "Hello, David," my doppelganger said, smiling that same sinister smile from the first video. Or, should I say, goodbye. I whirled around, but there was no one there. When I looked back at the phone, the call had ended. That's when I realized the horrible truth. The deepfakes, the conspiracy, Zoe. It was all part of the plan. A plan to break me down, to make me doubt everything I thought I knew. Because if you can't trust your own eyes, your own memories, what can you trust? I'm writing this now as a warning. To whom? I'm not sure. Maybe to myself, if there's anything left of the real me out there. Maybe to you, if you're reading this and haven't been compromised yet. Trust nothing. Question everything. The person in the mirror, the face on your screen, the memories in your head. Any of them could be fake. I hear footsteps outside my door now. Familiar footsteps. My footsteps. They're coming for me. Or maybe I'm coming for myself. In a world where seeing is no longer believing, who can say which of us is real? So, if you see me out there, walking down the street or teaching in a classroom, take a closer look. The David Wilson you're seeing might not be me at all. Or worse, it might be the real me, finally set free. Story 16. I never thought I'd be afraid of a doctor's appointment. But as I sit here in this eerily empty waiting room, watching the shadows grow longer and the staff's behavior become increasingly odd, I'm starting to think this might be the last appointment I ever keep. It all started with a phone call. I was in the middle of my usual morning routine, burning my tongue on too hot coffee and scrolling mindlessly through my phone, when an unfamiliar number flashed across the screen. "Hello, is this Sarah Lawson?" A crisp, professional voice asked when I answered. "Yes, that's me," I replied, trying to swallow a mouthful of scalding coffee without embarrassing myself. "This is Dr. Hartley's office. We're calling to remind you of your appointment today at 2:30 p.m. I frowned, racking my brain. I didn't remember making any appointments. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I don't have an appointment with Dr. Hartley." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Just a beat too long to be comfortable. "Are you sure, Ms. Lawson? Our records show you scheduled this appointment 3 weeks ago. It's a rather important follow-up." "A follow-up to what?" I wanted to ask, but something in the caller's tone made me hesitate. There was an undercurrent of something. Urgency. Expectation. I must have forgotten, I found myself saying. "Thank you for the reminder. I'll be there at 2:30. As soon as I hung up, I tried to reason with myself. This was stupid. I hadn't made any appointment. I didn't even know a doctor. Hartley. I should call back and clear things up. But I didn't. Something nagged at the back of my mind. A vague sense of unease I couldn't quite shake. What if I had made the appointment and just forgotten? What if it was important? So at 2:15, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a nondescript medical building. I'd driven past 100 times, but never really noticed before. It was an unremarkable 3-story structure, all glass and beige concrete. Nothing about it seemed out of the ordinary, but as I walked towards the entrance, a chill ran down my spine. That had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. The lobby was deserted. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the polished floor as I approached the directory. Dr. Hartley's name was there. Sure enough. 3rd floor, suite 37. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have. As I watched the numbers tick upward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was ascending into something I wasn't prepared for. Suite 307 was at the end of a long hallway. The frosted glass door bore Dr. Hartley's name in simple black letters. Nothing sinister about it, just another doctor's office. So why did my hand shake as I reached for the door handle? The waiting room beyond was wrong, somehow. It took me a moment to put my finger on it. Everything looked normal at first glance. The usual uncomfortable chairs, outdated magazines on low tables, generic paintings on the walls. But there was a stillness to it all, a sense of disuse that set my teeth on edge. And it was empty. Completely, utterly empty. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and lost in the silent room. "I have an appointment." For a long moment, there was no response. Then, from somewhere beyond a closed door, "Please have a seat. Ms. Lawson, the doctor will be with you shortly." I sank into one of the chairs, my legs suddenly feeling weak. How did they know my name? I hadn't checked in, hadn't spoken to anyone. Minutes ticked by, marked only by the soft whir of the air conditioning and the pounding of my heart. I tried to distract myself with one of the magazines, but the pages felt oddly slick under my fingers, the words blurring when I tried to focus on them. Just as I was about to give up and leave, the inner door opened. A nurse stepped out, her white uniform so crisp it almost hurt to look at Ms. Lawson, she said, her voice oddly flat. "The doctor will see you now." I stood on shaky legs, following her down a hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. The fluorescent lights above buzzed and flickered, casting strange shadows that danced at the edges of my vision. "In here, please," the nurse said, gesturing to an open door. As I passed her, I caught a whiff of something odd. Not the usual antiseptic hospital smell, but something earthier. Decay. The examination room was like any other I'd been in, with one glaring exception. No windows. The walls were a stark, unrelenting white that made my eyes hurt. "Please change into this," the nurse said, handing me a paper gown. "The doctor will be in shortly." Before I could ask any questions, she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her with a finality that made my stomach lurch. I changed slowly, every rustle of paper sounding impossibly loud in the silent room. As I sat on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath me, I tried to calm my racing thoughts. "This is ridiculous," I told myself. "It's just a doctor's appointment, nothing to be afraid of." But if that was true, why couldn't I remember making it? Why couldn't I shake the feeling that something was terribly, horribly wrong? The door opened, and a man in a white coat stepped in. He was tall, unnaturally so, his head nearly brushing the ceiling. His face was bland, forgettable, the kind of face your eyes slide right off of without really seeing. "Ms. Lawson," he said, his voice as unremarkable as his features. "I'm Dr. Hartley. How are you feeling today?" Confused, I blurted out. "I don't remember making this appointment. I don't even know what it's for." Dr. Hartley's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Memory issues are not uncommon in cases like yours. Don't worry, we'll have you sorted out in no time." Cases like mine? What was he talking about? He began the examination, his hands cold and somehow smooth as they pressed against my skin. Every touch sent a shiver through me, a deep-seated wrongness I couldn't explain. "Now," he said, stepping back, "let's discuss your symptoms." "Symptoms?" I echoed. "I don't have any symptoms. I feel fine." Dr. Hartley's head tilted at an angle that made my neck hurt just looking at it. "Are you sure about that, Ms. Lawson? No unusual dreams, no lost time, no sense of being?" Watched, my blood ran cold. How could he know about the dreams? The moments where I'd zone out, coming back to myself, minutes or even hours later with no memory of what I'd been doing. I don't know what you're talking about, I stammered. Doctor, Hartley sighed. A sound like wind whistling through dead leaves. I was afraid of this. It seems we've caught it just in time. Caught what? I demanded, my voice rising in panic. What's going on? But Dr. Hartley was already moving towards the door. Nurse, he called out. Prepare the procedure room. We'll need to move quickly. Wait, I cried, jumping off the examination table. I want to leave. Now. Dr. Hartley turned back to me. And for a moment, just a moment, his face seemed to ripple, features shifting like wax under a flame. I'm afraid that's not possible, Miss Lawson. You're very sick. We need to operate immediately. I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. No, I don't consent to any procedure. I'm leaving. I made a dash for the door, but Dr. Hartley was faster than he should have been. His hand clamped down on my arm, fingers digging in with inhuman strength. Now, he said, his voice still maddeningly calm. There's no need for hysteria. This is all for your own good. As he spoke, I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. His teeth. They were all wrong. Too many, too sharp, gleaming weightily in the harsh fluorescent light. I screamed then, a primal sound of pure terror. I thrashed and kicked, managing to break free of his grip. I ran, bursting out of the examination room and into the hallway beyond. But the hallway had changed. It stretched on impossibly long, doors lining either side as far as the eye could see. From behind those doors came sounds, whimpers, cries, the wet squelch of something I didn't want to think about. I ran, anyway, bare feet slapping against the cold tile. Behind me, I could hear Dr. Hartley's voice, still so calm, so reasonable, Miss Lawson, please. You're only making this harder on yourself. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, my lungs burning, searching desperately for an exit, a window, anything. But there was nothing. Just endless hallway, endless doors, and the growing certainty that I was never going to leave this place. As I round another corner, identical to all the others, I realized the truth. This isn't a doctor's office. It isn't even a building. It's something else. Something hungry. And I've walked right into its mouth. So if you ever get a call about an appointment you don't remember making, do yourself a favor. Don't go. Because some checkups you don't come back from. And as for me, well, I'm still running, still searching for a way out. But deep down I know, the next time Dr. Hartley catches up to me, it won't be for a consultation. It'll be for the procedure. Story 17. The first time I saw him, I thought nothing of it. By the 10th day, I was convinced he was following me. Now, as I sit on this subway car, watching him inch closer with each passing stop, I realize with growing horror that I am trapped in a game I never agreed to play. My name's Daniel, and up until 2 weeks ago, I was just another face in the crowd of New York City commuters. Every morning, I'd join the throng of bleary-eyed professionals on the 7:15 train from Queens to Manhattan. Same routine, same faces, same rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks, until he showed up. It was a Monday, I remembered that much. I was running late, having hit snooze one too many times on my alarm. I barely made it onto the train before the doors closed, my tie askew and a half-eaten bagel clutched in one hand. That's when I first noticed him. He was standing by the opposite doors, facing my direction. Tall, unnaturally thin, wearing a nondescript grey suit that somehow managed to make him blend into the metal of the subway car. But it was his stillness that caught my eye. In a car full of swaying bodies and fidgeting hands, he was perfectly, unnaturally still. Our eyes met for a brief moment. His were wrong, somehow. Too dark, too deep. I quickly looked away, that familiar big city instinct of don't engage kicking in. When I looked back a moment later, he was gone. I assumed he'd gotten off at the last stop, and I put him out of my mind. The next day, he was there again. Same spot, same unnerving stillness. This time, I studied him more closely. His face was oddly bland, the kind you'd forget the moment you looked away. But those eyes, they seemed to bore right through me. Once again, he was gone by the time I reached my stop. I shrugged it off. New York's a big city, but you tend to see the same faces on your regular commute. Nothing weird about that, right? But then it happened again, and again. Every single day, without fail, he was there. Always in the same spot, always staring in my direction. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he'd just started a new job with a similar schedule to mine. Maybe it was all just a weird coincidence. But as the days went on, I started noticing things. Unsettling things. He never moved. Not once. While everyone else swayed with the motion of the train, grabbed handrails, checked their phones, he remained perfectly still, like a statue or a corpse. He never got on or off the train, at least, not that I ever saw. One moment he'd be there, the next he'd be gone, with no indication of how or when he'd moved. And then, on the 7th day, I realized something that made my blood run cold. He was closer, not by much, maybe a foot or two, but I was certain that he'd been standing by the far doors before. Now he was next to the middle pole. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. The subway car was crowded, after all. Maybe he'd just shifted to make room for other passengers. But the next day, he was closer still. And the day after that. Each morning, he'd be there. Each morning, a little nearer. Always staring. Always still. By day 10, I was a nervous wreck. I'd started having nightmares about those eyes, about that inexorable approach. I considered changing my route, taking a different train, but something kept me coming back. A morbid curiosity, maybe, or the stubborn belief that if I just ignored it, this whole bizarre situation would go away. It didn't. Which brings us to today, day 14. I'm sitting in my usual spot, hands clenched tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. He's there, of course. Closer than ever. Only a few feet away now. I can see him more clearly at this distance. The grey of his suit seems to shift and swirl. If I look at it too long, like static on an old TV, his skin is pale, almost translucent. I swear I can see the shadow of veins beneath, pulsing with something that doesn't quite look like blood. But it's his eyes that hold me, black as pitch, with no whites visible. They don't blink, they don't move, they just absorb. The train lurches to a stop. People file out, new passengers squeeze in. Through it all, he remains unmoved, untouched, as if the crowd flows around him like water around a stone. When the doors close and we lurch forward again, I realize with a jolt of panic that he's moved again. He's at the edge of my peripheral vision now. If I turned my head just slightly to the left, I'd be staring right at him. I keep my eyes fixed straight ahead, my heart pounding so hard, I'm sure everyone in the car can hear it. Sweat trickles down my back, cold and clammy. What does he want? Why me? What happens when there's no more distance left between us? The questions swirl in my mind, each more terrifying than the last. I consider getting off at the next stop, breaking my routine. But somehow, I know it won't matter. He'll find me. He'll always find me. Another stop. More people leaving. Fewer bodies between us now. I can feel his presence like a physical weight pressing down on me. The air seems thicker, harder to breathe. Is it just my imagination, or is the temperature dropping? I risk a quick glance at my watch. 3 more stops until mine. 3 more stops too. What? Escape? Confront him? I don't know. The train plunges into a tunnel, the windows turning into black mirrors, and in that reflection, I see him. Right behind me now. So close I should be able to feel his breath on my neck. But he doesn't breathe. He doesn't move. He just is. A scream builds in my throat, but I choke it back. What would I even say? Help. This man is standing too close to me. In New York, that's just called rush hour. 2 more stops. He's directly beside me now. In my peripheral vision, I can see the line of his leg, the edge of his too perfect suit. Everything in me screams to run, to shove past the other passengers and flee. But I'm frozen in place, my body refusing to obey my panicked mind. 1 more stop. I can see his hand now, resting on the pole next to me. Long, pale fingers, nails just a bit too sharp. They twitch slightly, as if eager to grasp something, or someone. My stop. The train slows, the familiar station sliding into view. This is it, my last chance. As the doors open, I finally find the strength to move. I lurch to my feet, nearly falling in my haste. I don't look at him. I can't. I just need to get out, to escape. A hand closes around my wrist. Cold, impossibly strong. Slowly, feeling as if I'm moving through molasses, I turn. He's looking at me. Really looking at me. For the first time. His face splits in a smile that's far too wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. When he speaks, his voice is like gravel being crushed, like the screech of metal on metal. It reverberates not in my ears, but deep in my chest, in the marrow of my bones. Your stop, he says. Our stop. The doors begin to close. I should pull away, should scream, should do something, anything. But I don't. I can't. As the train pulls away from the station, carrying us with it, I realize the terrible truth. This was never about the destination. It was about the journey. My journey. Our journey. And it's only just beginning. So if you're ever on the subway and you notice someone standing too still, staring too long, don't look away. Don't pretend you don't see them. Because they see you. They've always seen you. And once they start moving closer, there's no stopping them. As for me, well, I'm still riding this train. Still watching the stations go by, each one a missed opportunity, a road not taken. And he's still here, right beside me. Waiting. Always waiting. For what? I don't know. But I have a feeling I'm going to find out. At the end of the line. Story 18. I never thought I'd be afraid of my own home. But as I sit here, staring at the notification on my phone, motion detected in living room, I realize with growing horror that the security system I installed to keep threats out might have just trapped me in with something far worse. It all started innocently enough. My wife, Sarah, and I had just moved into our first house, a charming little 2-story in the suburbs, complete with a white picket fence and a yard perfect for the kids we hoped to have someday. It wasn't much, but it was ours. and we were determined to make it a home. "We should get a security system," Sarah suggested one night over dinner. "You know, just to be safe." I agreed readily enough. After all, you can never be too careful these days, right? So I did my research, compared brands, and finally settled on the SmartGuard home security system. State-of-the-art technology, the website boasted. Protect what matters most. The day it arrived, I was like a kid on Christmas morning. I spent hours setting up cameras, installing motion sensors, and syncing everything to our phones. By the time I was done, our humble abode was a technological fortress. Maybe a bit overkill, Sarah teased, watching me test the system for the umpteenth time. I grinned, feeling rather pleased with myself. Better safe than sorry, hun. If only I'd known then just how sorry we'd be. The first week was uneventful. We got used to the soft chimes that announced our comings and goings, the little notifications that popped up on our phones. It felt good, knowing our home was protected. Then, late one night, it happened. A sharp ping from my phone jolted me awake. Motion detected in kitchen. 2:17 a.m., my heart raced as I sat up, instantly alert. Sarah stirred beside me. "Was wrong," she mumbled, still half asleep. "She," I whispered, straining my ears for any sound. The house was silent. Carefully, I pulled up the app on my phone, accessing the kitchen camera. The grainy night vision feed showed an empty room, bathed in eerie green light. Nothing, no intruder, no fallen object, not even a stray moth fluttering by the window. I did a sweep of the house anyway, baseball bat in hand, but found nothing out of place. By the time I crawled back into bed, I'd convinced myself it was just a glitch. New systems always have bugs, right? But it happened again the next night. And the night after that. Always in the middle of the night. Always in a different room. Kitchen, living room, hallway, each time. I'd check the camera feed to find nothing but empty spaces and shadows. "Maybe it's picking up the house, settling," Sarah suggested after the 5th consecutive night of false alarms. "Or mice in the walls," I nodded, trying to hide my unease. "Yeah, probably. I'll call the company tomorrow, see if they can adjust the sensitivity." But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Because it wasn't just the motion alerts anymore. I started noticing other things. Small things at first, easy to dismiss. A chair slightly out of place. A door I could have sworn I'd closed found standing open. The faint scent of something burning lingering in the air, gone before I could place it. Then came the noises. Soft at first, barely perceptible. The creak of a floorboard when both Sarah and I were sitting still. The whisper of fabric against fabric from an empty room. Once, I could have sworn I heard humming coming from our vacant spare bedroom. I didn't tell Sarah about these. Didn't want to frighten her. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the dark circles under her eyes growing deeper each day. She felt it too, even if she didn't say it out loud. The cameras never caught anything concrete, just vague shapes in the corner of the frame, there and gone so fast I couldn't be sure I'd really seen them. Shadows that seemed to move against the natural fall of light. And sometimes, just sometimes, a pair of pinprick lights in the darkness, like eyes reflecting the infrared. I became obsessed with checking the app, watching the feeds for hours on end. Sleep became a luxury, snatched in fitful bursts between alerts and false alarms. "You need to relax," Sarah said one morning, eyeing me over her coffee mug. The whole point of this system was to make us feel safer, not drive us crazy. I managed a weak smile. "You're right. I'll try to dial it back." But that very night, everything changed. The alert came at 3:33 a.m., jolting me from a restless sleep. Multiple motion events detected. My hands shook as I pulled up the app. The map of our house glowed on the screen, nearly every room lit up with activity markers. "Sarah," I hissed, shaking her awake. "Sarah, wake up." She blinked at me groggily. "What's wrong?" "There's someone in the house," I whispered, my voice tight with fear. Fully awake now, Sarah sat up. "Are you sure? Did you see someone?" I shook my head, pulling up camera feed after camera feed. Each one showed an empty room, and yet the motion alerts kept coming. Living room, kitchen, stairs, hallway. It was as if something was moving through our house, room by room, getting closer. A floorboard creaked just outside our bedroom door. Sarah's hand found mine, squeezing tight. We both stared at the door, hardly daring to breathe. Slowly, so slowly, the handle began to turn. I wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but I was frozen, paralyzed by a fear so deep it felt primal. The door swung open. Nothing, just the dark hallway beyond. For a long moment, we sat there in silence, hearts pounding. Then Sarah let out a shaky laugh. See, nothing there. Just the wind, or the house settling, or her words cut off abruptly as the bedroom camera pinged. Motion detected in master bedroom. 3:37 a.m. With trembling fingers, I pulled up the feed. And there, in the grainy night vision image of our own room, I saw it. A figure, standing at the foot of our bed. Tall, impossibly thin, its proportions all wrong. It stood utterly still, face, if it had won, turned towards the camera, towards us. A scream built in my throat, but before I could release it, the figure moved. Fast, faster than anything should be able to move. One moment, it was at the foot of the bed. The next, it was right in front of the camera. The feed went black. In the darkness of our room, I heard Sarah's panicked breathing, felt her nails digging into my arm. "What was that?" she whispered. "Tom, what the hell was that?" I couldn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the spot where the figure had been, where, in the faint light from my phone screen, I could now see something moving. The air in the room grew cold, so cold I could see our breath misting in front of us. A low hum filled the air, not quite a sound but more a vibration that I felt in my bones. And then, voice shaking, Sarah said the words that turned my blood to ice. "Tom, why is the closet door opening?" I watched, helpless, as the door slowly swung wide. The darkness beyond seemed to pulse, to breathe. And from that darkness, something emerged. Its shape was wrong, fluid, ever-changing, like smoke given form. But the eyes, God, the eyes. Pinpricks of light in a face of shadow, boring into me with an intelligence that was undeniably alien and hungry. As it glided towards us, I finally found my voice. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat with a force that left it raw. The thing paused, cocking its head as if curious. Then it smiled, a gash of white in the darkness of its face, filled with teeth like broken glass. My phone pinged one last time. Intruder detected in master bedroom to 3:45 a.m. The notification glowed on the screen. A final, mocking reminder of my hubris. I had thought to protect us from the dangers outside, but I had invited something in. Something that had always been here, waiting for an invitation. As the thing reached for us with hands that were not hands, elongating and sharpening into claws, I realized the terrible truth. Our home wasn't protected. It was haunted, and we were trapped inside with whatever we had awakened. So if you're thinking of installing a new security system, take my advice. Sometimes, ignorance really is bliss. Because once you start looking for the things that go bump in the night, you might just find them. And trust me, you really, really don't want to. Story 19. The moment I realized we were lost, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. As the unfamiliar road stretched endlessly before us, I couldn't shake the feeling that with each turn, we were driving deeper into something we might never escape. It was supposed to be a simple family road trip. My wife, Lisa, our 2 kids, Emma, 10, and Tyler, 8, and me heading to my parents' place for Thanksgiving. We'd made this drive a dozen times before, but not this time. This time was different. It started with a traffic alert on the radio. Due to an accident, Route 16 is closed between exits 23 and 27. Seek alternate routes. Lisa glanced at me from the passenger seat. That's our usual way. What do you want to do, Jack? I shrugged, trying to project confidence I didn't quite feel. No biggie. We'll just take the next exit, follow the detour signs. How hard can it be? If only I'd known. The exit ramp curved sharply, depositing us onto a narrow 2-lane road I didn't recognize. Thick woods pressed in on both sides, their branches reaching over the pavement like gnarled fingers. My headlights cut through the gathering dusk, illuminating a worn detour sign with an arrow pointing right. Well, at least they've marked it clearly, Lisa said, a note of forced cheerfulness in her voice. I nodded, following the arrow onto an even smaller road. The pavement here was rougher, full of potholes that made our SUV rattle and shake. Dad, are we lost? Emma's voice piped up from the back seat. Nah, sweetie, I said, forcing a smile I hoped looked reassuring in the rearview mirror. Just taking a little scenic route. But as we drove on, following one detour sign after another, that reassurance felt increasingly hollow. The roads got narrower, the woods denser. Familiar landmarks of our usual route were nowhere to be seen. Instead, we passed abandoned barns, their weathered woods silvery in the fading light, and overgrown fields dotted with the rusting hulks of old farm equipment. I glanced at the GPS on my phone, hoping for some guidance. The screen showed nothing but a blank grid with our little blue dot in the center. Honey. Lisa's voice was tight with barely concealed worry. Do you have any idea where we are? I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died in my throat as I caught sight of something in my rearview mirror. Headlights, a pair of them, about 100 yards back. Looks like we're not the only ones on this detour, I said, trying to sound casual. Lisa turned to look. Oh, that's good. At least we're not alone out here. Single quotes. But as the minutes ticked by and I made turn after turn, following those infernal detour signs, I realized something odd. The headlights behind us never wavered, never got closer, never fell behind. Just stayed there, a constant presence about 50 yards back. Jack, Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. That car. It's made every turn we have. A chill ran down my spine. It's probably just someone else following the detour, I said, not believing it even as the words left my mouth. Mum, I'm scared. Tyler's small voice came from the back seat. Where are we? It's okay, honey, Lisa said, turning to comfort him. We're just taking a little adventure. Right, Jack. I nodded, grip tightening on the steering wheel. Right, an adventure. But the word tasted like ash in my mouth. Because the truth was, I had no idea where we were, or where we were going. The detour signs seemed to be leading us in circles, each unfamiliar road looking eerily similar to the last. And still, those headlights followed. I made a sharp right turn, then quickly ducked left onto a small side road, my tires crunching on gravel. My heart pounded as I watched the rearview mirror. The headlights followed. Okay, don't panic, I muttered to myself, trying to slow my breathing. There's got to be a reasonable explanation. But what if there wasn't? What if whoever was behind us had less than friendly intentions? Out here, in the middle of nowhere, with no cell signal and 2 scared kids in the back seats. The thought sent a surge of protective anger through me. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, the engine of our SUV whining in protest. The speedometer crept up. 50, 60, 70 miles per hour. Way too fast for these twisting back roads, but I was beyond caring. "Jack, slow down," Lisa cried, her knuckles white as she gripped the door handle. "You're scaring the kids." I risked another glance in the mirror. The headlights were still there, keeping pace effortlessly. "I can't," I said through gritted teeth. "We need to lose them." "Lose who?" "Jack, what's going on?" But I couldn't answer. My entire focus was on the road ahead, desperately scanning for any sign of civilization. A house, a gas station, hell, I'd settle for a barn at this point. Anything to get off this endless nightmare of a road. That's when I saw it. A light in the distance. Not headlights, but a warm, yellow glow. A house. Relief flooded through me. I'd pull in, knock on the door, ask to use their phone. Surely, once we were off the road, our mysterious pursuer would give up and move on. As we approached, I could make out more details. It was an old farmhouse, paint peeling from its clapboard sides. But there were lights on inside, and an ancient pickup truck parked in the overgrown drive. I turned sharply, tires squealing as I pulled into the driveway. In my mirror, I saw the headlights slow, then stop at the end of the drive. "Stay in the car," I told Lisa, my hand already on the door handle. "Lock the doors. I'm going to see if they have a phone we can use." "Jack, wait." Lisa started, but I was already out, striding purposefully towards the house. The gravel crunched under my feet as I hurried up the path, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I was halfway up the porch steps when the front door creaked open. "Can I help you?" a reedy voice called out. An old man stood in the doorway, squinting at me suspiciously. He was rail-thin, dressed in a stained undershirt and striped pajama pants. One gnarled hand gripped the door frame, while the other disappeared behind his back. "I'm so sorry to bother you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we're lost, and there's someone following us. Could we please use your phone to call for help?" The old man's squint deepened. "Following you?" "Yes." There I turned, pointing back toward the road, but the words died in my throat. The driveway was empty. There was no car idling at the entrance, no headlights piercing the darkness, just empty road stretching off into blackness. I don't understand," I stammered. They were right there. The old man took a halting step onto the porch, peering out into the night. "Don't see nobody," he said, but they were there. "I swear, they've been following us for miles." He gave me a long look, his rheumy eyes searching my face. Whatever he saw there made him sigh and shake his head. "Look, son," he said, his voice gentler now. "It's late, and these roads, they can play tricks on a person's mind, especially if you ain't from around here." I opened my mouth to protest, but he held up a hand. "Why don't you and your family come on inside? We'll get you some coffee, maybe look at a map, figure out where you need to be." I hesitated, glancing back at our car where Lisa and the kids waited, their faces pale ovals in the darkness. Every instinct was screaming at me to get back in the car and drive. until we found somewhere familiar. But we were lost, tired, and if I was being honest, more than a little scared. "Okay," I said finally. "Thank you. That would be great." As I turned to wave Lisa and the kids over, something caught my eye. There, in the old man's other hand, previously hidden behind his back, a shotgun. He followed my gaze and shrugged apologetically. Can't be too careful these days. Lot of strange folks on these back roads. A chill ran down my spine as I nodded, suddenly unsure if I'd made the right decision. But as Lisa and the kids made their way up the path, I realized we were committed now. The old man ushered us inside, the floorboards creaking ominously under our feet, as the door swung shut behind us with a final sounding click. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just stepped out of one mystery and into another. And somewhere out in the darkness, on those twisting, unfamiliar roads, a pair of headlights flickered to life once more, waiting, watching, ready to resume the chase whenever we dared to venture out again. Because on some detours, you never really find your way back. You just keep driving deeper and deeper until the road becomes your home. And the thing following you, it becomes your constant companion, always just out of sight, but never truly gone. So if you're ever out for a drive and see those detour signs, think twice before you turn. Because sometimes the long way around isn't just inconvenient, it's inescapable. Story 20. The first time I caught my reflection smiling when I wasn't, I thought I was going crazy. By the third week, I was convinced the mirror was haunted. Now, as I sit here, watching my reflection move independently of me, I realize with growing horror that it's not just haunted, it's hungry. My name's Lily, and up until a month ago, I was your average 26-year-old trying to make it in the big city. I'd just moved into my first solo apartment, a tiny studio in a converted Victorian house. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I was determined to make it feel like home. That's how I ended up at Curious Goods, a quaint little antique shop tucked away on a side street. The moment I stepped inside, the musty scent of old books and polished wood enveloped me. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through grimy windows, giving the whole place an otherworldly feel. "Can I help you, dear?" The voice made me jump. An elderly woman materialized from behind a towering bookshelf, her silver hair gleaming in the dim light. "Oh, yes," I stammered. "I'm looking for a mirror for my new apartment." Her eyes lit up. "Ah, I have just the thing. Follow me." She led me to the back of the shop, where a large, ornate mirror stood propped against the wall. Its frame was intricate, all swirling patterns and delicate flowers carved into dark wood. The glass itself seemed to shimmer, even in the low light. "It's beautiful," I breathed, reaching out to touch the frame. "Isn't it?" the old woman said, a note of pride in her voice. Victorian era. Been in the shop for years, just waiting for the right owner. I should have asked why no one had bought it before. Should have wondered why such a stunning piece was still available. But I was too enchanted by my own reflection, imagining how it would look in my tiny apartment. "I'll take it," I said, not even bothering to ask the price. The old woman's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Excellent choice, dear. I'm sure you two will be very happy together." I should have noticed the odd phrasing, should have seen the glint in her eye. But I was too excited, already planning where I'd hang my new treasure. Getting the mirror home was a challenge, but I managed. I hung it in my bedroom, opposite my bed. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, the last thing I saw was my own reflection, smiling back at me. It wasn't until a few days later that I noticed something off. I was getting ready for work, rushing as usual. As I hurried past the mirror, brushing my teeth, I could have sworn I saw my reflection pause, toothbrush hovering mid-air, while I kept moving. I froze, staring at the mirror. My reflection stared back, mirroring my confused expression perfectly. "Get it together, Lily," I muttered, shaking my head. "You're just tired." But as the days went on, these little discrepancies kept happening. My reflection's eyes would linger on me a second too long when I looked away. Its smile seemed to widen just a fraction more than mine. Once, I could have sworn I saw it blink, while my own eyes were open. I started avoiding the mirror. I'd get dressed with my back to it, do my makeup using my phone camera. But I could always feel it there, watching, waiting. About a week in, the dreams started. I'd find myself standing in front of the mirror in the middle of the night, my reflection beckoning to me. Its mouth would move, forming words I couldn't quite hear. I'd lean closer, closer, until my nose was almost touching the glass. And then, just as I thought I could make out what it was saying, I'd wake up. Every night, the same dream. Every night, I'd get a little closer to understanding. During the day, the oddities escalated. I'd catch glimpses of my reflection when I wasn't even near the mirror. In windows, in the screen of my turn-off TV, in the polished surface of my coffee maker. Always watching, always smiling, that too wide smile. I started to feel like I was going crazy. I considered getting rid of the mirror, but something always stopped me. It was mine, after all. And besides, where would I put it? The thought of it sitting in some dark corner, reflecting God knows what, was somehow worse than having it where I could see it. It was during the third week that things really took a turn. I woke up one night, the room bathed in an eerie, silvery glow. The mirror was shimmering, its surface rippling like water. And there, in its depths, I saw myself, but not myself. This version of me was perfect. Her hair fell in elegant waves, not the frizzy mess mine usually was. Her skin glowed, unblemished and radiant. She smiled at me, and I felt a pull, an urge to get closer. I found myself standing before the mirror, though I didn't remember getting out of bed. My reflection raised a hand, pressing it against the glass. Without thinking, I did the same. The surface of the mirror was cold, so cold it burned. But I couldn't pull away. My reflection's smile widened, impossibly wide, her teeth gleaming in the darkness. "Let me out," she whispered, her voice like broken glass in my mind. "Let me be you." I jerked back, stumbling away from the mirror. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short gasps. "This isn't real," I said aloud, my voice shaking. "It's just a dream. Wake up, Lily. Wake up." But I didn't wake up, because I wasn't asleep. From that night on, things got worse, much worse. My reflection stopped pretending to mirror me at all. It would move on its own, watching me as I moved about the room. Sometimes, when I wasn't looking directly at it, I'd see it reach out, as if trying to claw its way out of the glass. I stopped sleeping. How could I, knowing that thing was watching me? I'd sit on my bed, back pressed against the wall, staring at the mirror all night. My reflection would stare back, that hungry smile never leaving its face. I lost weight. Dark circles appeared under my eyes. People at work started to whisper, shooting concerned glances my way. But how could I explain? Who would believe me? "Lily, honey, are you okay?" My mum's voice crackled over the phone, worry evident even through the bad connection. "You don't sound like yourself." I laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "I don't think I am myself anymore, Mum." There was a long pause. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I opened my mouth to explain, to pour out the whole insane story. But as I did, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. It was shaking its head slowly, that terrible smile still in place. "Nothing, Mum," I heard myself say. "Just stressed from work. I'll be fine." As I hung up, my reflection nodded approvingly. I felt sick. That night, as I sat in my usual spot, eyes fixed on the mirror, something changed. My reflection stood up. I remained seated, frozen in terror, as it walked to the very edge of the mirror's frame. It pressed both hands against the glass, and I watched in horror as they began to push through. The surface of the mirror bulged outward, like a membrane stretching to its limit. Fingers emerged, then hands, pale and perfect and wrong. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but I was paralyzed, watching as my doppelganger pulled itself out of the mirror, inch by excruciating inch. As it stepped fully into my room, I finally found my voice. "What are you?" I whispered. It cocked its head, regarding me with eyes that were mine, but not mine. When it spoke, its voice was like nails on a chalkboard, like screams from a great distance. "I'm you," it said. "The better you. The you that should have been." It took a step towards me, its movements fluid and graceful in a way I'd never been. "For so long, I've watched from the other side, seen your mistakes, your failures. Now it's my turn." I shook my head, pressing myself further against the wall. "No, you can't be me. You're not real." It laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Lily, I'm more real than you've ever been. And now, I'm going to take what's rightfully mine," as it reached for me, its fingers elongating into claws. I finally found the strength to move. I ducked under its grasp, making a mad dash for the door, but I wasn't fast enough. Its hand closed around my arm, its touch burning cold. It yanked me back, spinning me around to face the mirror. "Look," it hissed in my ear. "Look at what you could be." In the mirror, I saw myself, the real myself, fading, becoming transparent, and behind me, my doppelganger was becoming more solid, more real. "No," I screamed, thrashing in its grip. "Let me go." But it was too strong. As I struggled, I felt myself being pulled backwards towards the mirror. The surface rippled, reaching out for me like hungry tongues. "Don't fight it, Lily," my reflection whispered. "It's better on this side. You'll see." As the cold surface of the mirror enveloped me, I had one last, terrifying thought. How many others had this happened to? How many souls were trapped behind these cursed panes of glass? The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was my own face, smiling that terrible smile as it stepped fully into my world. So if you're ever in an antique shop and you see a beautiful old mirror that seems too good to be true, take my advice, walk away. Because sometimes the reflection staring back at you isn't just an image. Sometimes it's something waiting to take your place. And once it does, you might never find your way back to the right side of the glass.